I'm Dave, a suburban dad from Chicago who survived the first 48 hours of the zombie apocalypse. One Monday morning, everything changed. Screams erupted, the infected swarmed our streets, and I had to protect my family. This is my story of survival, tough choices, and the fight to stay human in a world gone mad. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. It was just another Monday morning in suburban Chicago. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it feels like a lifetime ago. My name's Dave, and I'm here to tell you about how I survived the first 48 hours of the zombie apocalypse. It all started so normally, you know. I was in the kitchen, pouring my second cup of coffee, getting ready to head to work. My wife, Sarah, had already left for her early shift at the hospital, and the kids were at school. Everything seemed fine, but looking back, there were signs. Little things that should have tipped me off that something wasn't right. I remember scrolling through my phone, half listening to the morning news playing on the TV in the background. There was a report about increased hospital admissions due to a new strain of flu. Nothing too alarming, we'd been through flu seasons before, but then I noticed something odd in my social media feed. People were posting about strange encounters on their morning commutes, erratic behavior, fights breaking out in usually calm neighborhoods. I dismissed it as typical Monday morning stress. As I was about to head out the door, I glanced out the window and saw my neighbor, Tom, standing in his driveway. He was just staring at his car, not moving. I thought maybe he'd forgotten his keys or something, so I opened the front door to call out to him. That's when I noticed the silence. Our street is usually busy with people leaving for work, kids waiting for the school bus, but that morning, it was eerily quiet. I stepped onto my porch, coffee mug still in hand, and called out to Tom. "Hey, everything okay?" He didn't respond. He just slowly turned towards me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale and clammy. He started walking towards me, but something was off about his gait. It was jerky, uncoordinated. I was about to ask if he needed help when I heard the first scream. It came from a few houses down, piercing the morning quiet. Then another scream and another. Suddenly, the silence was replaced by a cacophony of yells, car alarms, and what sounded like breaking glass. My heart started racing. I ran back inside, locked the door, and tried to call Sarah. No answer. I tried the kids' schools. Nothing. The local news was now reporting civil unrest in several areas of the city. They advised people to stay indoors and avoid contact with anyone exhibiting flu-like symptoms or aggressive behavior. That's when it hit me. This was no ordinary flu. I rushed to the windows, pulling down blinds and locking everything I could. Through the gaps, I could see people running down the street. Some were clearly panicked, fleeing from something. Others moved with that same jerky gait I'd seen in Tom, and they were chasing the ones running. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "ER overrun, strange attacks. Stay home, stay safe. Love you." My hands were shaking as I tried to reply, but the message wouldn't send. The network was already becoming overwhelmed. I needed to think, to plan. This couldn't be happening, right? Zombies were the stuff of movies and TV shows, not real life. But as I peeked out the window again and saw a woman being tackled by 3 people who then began to, I can't even describe it. I knew this was real and it was happening right outside my door. The reality of the situation started to sink in. I was alone in the house, my family was out there somewhere, and the world as I knew it was falling apart around me. I had to survive, had to find a way to protect my family. But how? I was just a regular guy, an office worker. I'd never even been in a real fight, let alone faced anything like this. I tried to think rationally. What did I have that could help me survive? Food, water, potential weapons. I started taking inventory. We had enough food to last a week, maybe 2 if we rationed carefully. Water could be an issue if the tap stopped running. As for weapons, I had some kitchen knives and tools in the garage. Not much, but it would have to do. As I moved through the house, gathering supplies, I could hear the chaos outside growing. More screams, the sound of car crashes, distant sirens that seemed to be getting fewer and farther between. I tried the TV again, flipping through channels. Some were just static now. The ones still broadcasting were all showing the same thing, scenes of panic and violence in cities across the country. I found myself in my daughter's room, clutching her favorite stuff. Hit me hard. Were the kids safe? Had the infection reached their schools? And Sarah, my Sarah, surrounded by sick and injured people in the ER. Was she okay? The thought of them out there, scared and in danger, nearly broke me. But I couldn't fall apart, not now. They needed me to be strong, to survive, to find them. A crash from outside snapped me back to the present. I ran to the window just in time to see a car plow into a group of the infected on the street. The driver stumbled out, seemingly unharmed, only to be swarmed by more of those things pouring out from between the houses. I wanted to help, to shout, to do something, but I knew opening the door Making any noise would only bring them to me. I watched helpless as the driver disappeared under a pile of thrashing bodies. The infected seemed to lose interest after a few minutes, wandering off in various directions. Some of them were my neighbors, people I'd known for years. Mrs. Johnson, from across the street, who always baked cookies for the neighborhood kids. The teenager who mowed lawns in the summer. Now they were just shells, moving with a terrible purpose. As the hours wore on, I tried to keep busy. I moved furniture to barricade the doors and windows on the ground floor. I filled every container I could find with water just in case. I searched for anything that could be used as a weapon. All the while my mind raced. How far had this spread? Was it just Chicago? Just the US? Or was this happening globally? How long would it last? Would help come? The power flickered a few times throughout the day, but mostly stayed on. I kept the TV on low volume, hungry for any information. Reports were becoming less frequent, more chaotic. Looting had started in some areas. The infected seemed to be multiplying exponentially. There was talk of safe zones being established, but no concrete information on where. As night fell, new terror set in. The darkness seemed to embolden the infected. Their moans grew louder, more frequent. Occasionally I'd hear a scream cut through the night. Another victim found. I sat in the darkness, a kitchen knife in one hand, my phone in the other, praying for a message from Sarah or about the kids. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every distant sound had me on edge. I found myself planning, thinking of what I'd need to do if I had to leave, where I'd go, how I'd find my family. But the thought of stepping outside, of facing those things, filled me with dread. As the first light of dawn broke, I realized I'd survived the first night of the apocalypse, but it was only the beginning. I had no idea what challenges the day would bring, what difficult decisions I'd have to make. All I knew was that I had to survive, had to find my family, had to hold on to hope that somewhere out there things were better. Little did I know, the true tests of my survival were yet to come. The infected were evolving. Other survivors would soon enter the picture, and the choices I'd have to make would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself. But that's getting ahead of the story. First, I had to face the morning and whatever it might bring. As the sun rose on that second day, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I'd made it through the night, but what would this new day bring? The sounds outside had changed. The screams were fewer now, replaced by an almost constant, low moaning. It was somehow worse, that constant reminder of what was out there. I decided to do a thorough check of the house. I needed to know exactly what resources I had and what vulnerabilities I needed to address. As I moved from room to room, I couldn't help but notice all the little reminders of my family. Sarah's coffee mug still in the sink, my son's backpack. By the door, my daughter's homework spread out on the dining room table. It felt like they should walk in at any moment, like this was all just a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. This was our new reality. As I cataloged our food supplies, I realized we had less than I'd initially thought. If I had to guess, maybe a week's worth for one person, less if I had to feed more. Water wasn't an immediate concern as the taps were still running, but I filled up every container I could find just in case. I was in the middle of this when I heard a noise that made my blood run cold. It was coming from the garage, a scraping sound followed by a thud. Something was trying to get in. I grabbed the nearest weapon, a heavy flashlight, and crept towards the garage door. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. Slowly, I opened the door. The garage was dark, but I could make out a figure moving near the main door. It was hunched over, moving erratically. As my eyes adjusted, I recognized him. It was Tom, my neighbor, the one I'd seen in his driveway yesterday. He must have gotten in through a small window I'd forgotten to secure, and I saw his face clearly for the first time since everything started. His eyes were clouded over. Blood caked around his mouth and down his shirt. He let out a guttural moan and lunged at me. I reacted on instinct, swinging the flashlight hard. It connected with his head with a sickening crunch and he went down, but he didn't stay down. Almost immediately, he started to get back up. I hit him again and again, my mind reeling at what I was doing. This was Tom, the guy who'd helped me fix my lawnmower last summer, who'd invited us over for barbecues. But it wasn't Tom anymore. Not really. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stopped moving. I stood there, shaking, covered in sweat and worse things. I'd just killed someone. No, not someone. Something. But it had been someone once. The realization of what I'd done, what I might have to do again, hit me hard. I barely made it to a corner of the garage before I threw up. After I'd collected myself, I knew I had to deal with the body. I couldn't leave it in the garage, and I couldn't risk going outside to bury it. In the end, I wrapped it in some old tarps and shoved it into a far corner. It was the best I could do under the circumstances. Back inside, I cleaned myself up as best I could and tried to process what had just happened. I'd killed one of them. I'd survived an attack, but it had been so close. If I hadn't heard the noise, if I'd been a second slower, I realized then that I couldn't just hide hide and hope for rescue. I needed to be proactive if I wanted to survive. I spent the next few hours fortifying the house as best I could. I boarded up the garage window and checked every other possible entry point. I moved more furniture to block the doors and windows on the ground floor. I gathered everything that could be used as a weapon and placed them strategically around the house. As I worked, I kept the TV on in the background, hoping for any new information. The news was getting worse. Major cities were being overrun. The military was trying to establish safe zones, but they were being overwhelmed. There were reports of looting, of people turning on each other in panic. It seemed like society was unraveling faster than anyone could have imagined. I tried calling Sarah and the kids' schools again, but the lines were completely jammed now. I left voicemails, sent texts, hoping against hope that they'd get through. The lack of communication was maddening. Were they safe? Were they trying to get home? Should I go out looking for them? As these thoughts swirled in my head, I heard a commotion outside. Cautiously, I peeked through a gap in the boarded-up window. A group of people was running down the street, clearly uninfected. They were being pursued by a larger group of the infected. I watched, helpless, as one of the survivors tripped and fell. The infected were on them in seconds. I had to look away, but then I heard something that made me look back. Gunshots, sharp and loud, cutting through the moans and screams. I saw a man with a shotgun firing into the group of infected. He was buying time for the others to escape. For a moment, I thought about opening the door, trying to help, but fear held me back. I watched as the man with the shotgun was eventually overwhelmed, his screams joining the cacophony outside. The incident left me shaken. There were other survivors out there, fighting, dying, and I was in here, hiding. Was I a coward, or just being smart? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that the world outside my door was becoming more dangerous by the hour. As the day wore on, I found myself falling into a routine. Check the barricades, listen for any sounds of intrusion, scan the streets through the gaps in the boards, check the news, repeat. It was mind-numbing, but it kept me focused, kept me from spiraling into despair. The power started flickering more frequently as evening approached. Each time it went out, I held my breath, praying it would come back on. So far it had, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it went out for good. I gathered all the batteries I could find and made sure my phone was fully charged. As night fell again, the noises outside changed. The infected seemed more active in the darkness, but there were other sounds too. Car engines revving in the distance, more gunshots, even what sounded like explosions. The world outside was descending into chaos, and I was trapped in here, alone with my thoughts and fears. I found myself in my bedroom, looking at a photo of my family. Sarah's smile, the kids' laughing faces. It was taken last summer at the lake house. We'd been so happy, so normal. Would we ever have moments like that again? Would I ever see them again? The thought of my family out there, scared and alone, was almost unbearable. That's when I made a decision. I couldn't just sit here anymore. I needed to find them, to know if they were safe. But I also knew I couldn't just rush out blindly. Weapons. I spent most of the night planning, making lists, trying to think of every possibility. As dawn broke on the third day, I knew what I had to do. I was going to venture out. I had to, for my family, for my sanity. I didn't know what I would find out there, what dangers I would face, but I knew I couldn't stay in this house forever, slowly going mad with worry and isolation. I gathered what supplies I could into a backpack: food, water, first aid kit, flashlight, batteries. I found an old baseball bat in the garage and a kitchen knife that I strapped to my belt. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table just in case Sarah or the kids made it home while I was gone. It felt strange, like I was going on a normal trip, not venturing into a nightmare. As I stood at the front door, hand on the knob, I hesitated. Was I really ready for this? Could I face what was out there? But then I thought of Sarah, of the kids. I had to try. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever might come. Then, slowly, carefully, I opened the door and stepped out into the changed world. The moment I stepped outside, the full impact of what had happened hit me. Our once quiet suburban street looked like a war zone. Abandoned cars littered the road, some with doors still open. Trash and debris were scattered everywhere. The air smelled of smoke and something else, something rotten that I didn't want to think about too much. I gripped my baseball bat tightly, eyes darting around for any sign of movement. The infected seemed to be fewer during daylight, but I knew they were still out there. I had a plan: check the neighbors' houses first, then make my way towards the kids' school. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all I had. The first house I approached was the Johnsons. I'd seen Mrs. Johnson as one of the infected on that first day, but I had to check, had to know if anyone had survived. I knocked softly on the door, calling out in a low voice. No response. The door was unlocked, so I cautiously pushed it open. The inside of the house was a mess. Furniture overturned, broken glass everywhere. I called out again, but the only answer was silence. As I moved through the rooms, I saw signs of a struggle. Bloodstains on the walls and floor. In the kitchen, I found a half-packed bag of supplies. Someone had tried to leave but hadn't made it. I added the supplies to my own bag, feeling guilty, but knowing I needed everything I could get. As I was about to leave, I heard a noise from upstairs. My heart started racing. Slowly, bat raised, I climbed the stairs. The noise was coming from behind a closed door. I took a deep breath and opened it. Inside, huddled in a corner, was a young boy, Tommy, the Johnson's son. He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Mr. Dave," he whispered. I nearly cried with relief at finding someone alive, someone I knew. "It's okay, Tommy," I said, lowering the bat. "I'm here to help. Are you hurt?" He shook his head. I learned that he'd been hiding up here for 2 days ever since his parents had turned. He was hungry, thirsty, and scared out of his mind, but he was alive. I couldn't leave him there, but I also knew that having a child with me would make everything more difficult. Still, there was no choice. I helped Tommy pack a small bag and explained that we needed to be very quiet and do exactly as I said. He nodded, his eyes still wide with fear, but also with a hint of hope. As we left the Johnsons' house, I realized my plans had to change. I couldn't risk taking Tommy to the school or the hospital. We needed to find somewhere safe, somewhere we could hole up and figure out our next move. We made our way down the street, moving from cover to cover. I was hyper aware of every sound, every movement. Tommy was surprisingly quiet, clinging to my side like a shadow. We checked a few more houses, but found no one else alive. As we approached the end of our street, I heard engines, military engines. For a moment, hope surged through me. Help had finally come, but as the vehicles came into view, I quickly pulled Tommy behind a parked car. It wasn't a rescue operation. The military vehicles were setting up barricades, blocking off the entire neighborhood. I could hear orders being shouted, something about a quarantine zone. With a sinking feeling, I realized they weren't here to save us. They were here to contain us. We couldn't stay there. I made a split-second decision and led Tommy towards the back of the houses, away from the barricades. We needed to find a way out of the quarantine zone, but first, we needed a safe place to regroup. As we snuck through backyards, I spotted a house that looked relatively untouched. The back door was secured with a heavy padlock. Good. That meant it might be safe inside. I used a rock to break a small window pane, reached in, and unlocked the door. Once inside, I did a quick sweep, struggle or infection. The owners must have left early on, and the padlock had kept others out. It would do for now. I set Tommy up in the living room with some food and water, then did a more thorough check of our temporary refuge. The house had a good stock of non-perishable food, some basic medical supplies, and, to my relief, a battery-powered radio. Maybe now we could get some real information about what was happening. As I fiddled with the radio, trying to find a clear signal, Tommy spoke up. "Mr. Dave, do you think my parents are okay?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How? Do you tell a child that his parents are gone? That they've become monsters? I sat down next to him, choosing my words carefully. "Tommy, I don't know for sure what happened to your parents, but I do know that they loved you very much and they would want you to be safe. Right now, that's what we need to focus on, okay? Being safe." He nodded, tears in his eyes but a determined look on his face. This kid was tougher than I'd given him credit for. As I turned back to the radio, I finally caught a clear signal. What I heard made my blood run cold. The infection had spread far beyond Chicago. Major cities across the country were falling. The government was establishing quarantine zones, like the one we were in now, but many were failing. There was talk of safe zones being set up, places where the military was still in control, but the locations weren't being broadcast for security reasons. One piece of news gave me a glimmer of hope. They mentioned that some hospitals had been fortified as treatment and research centers. Could Sarah's hospital be one of them? It was the first real lead I had on potentially finding her. As the broadcast continued, it became clear that the situation was dire. Society was breaking down faster than anyone could have predicted. Law and order were collapsing in many areas. The infected were evolving, becoming more aggressive, more cunning. I shut off the radio, my mind racing. We couldn't stay here long. The quarantine zone wouldn't hold forever, and when it fell, it would be chaos. We needed to find a way out, to reach one of those safe zones. But first, I had to try to find Sarah and the kids. I spent the next few hours planning, using some old maps I found in the house. The hospital where Sarah worked was about 5 miles away. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be a difficult trip, but now, it might as well have been 100 miles. As evening approached, I knew we'd have to wait until morning to move. The infected were more active at night, and I wasn't going to risk Tommy's safety. I set up a watch rotation, with Tommy taking the early evening shift while I got some much-needed rest. Lying there in the dark, listening to Tommy's soft breathing and the distant sounds of a world gone mad, I couldn't help but think about how quickly everything had changed. Just days ago, my biggest worry had been a presentation at work. Now I was fighting for survival, responsible not just for my own life but for a child's as well. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Tommy was shaking me awake. "Mr. Dave," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There's someone outside." I was instantly alert, grabbing the baseball bat as I moved to the window. In the faint moonlight, I could see a figure moving in the backyard. It wasn't the jerky movement of the infected. This was someone alive, someone sneaking around. For a moment, I considered calling out, letting them know we were here. Another survivor could be valuable, but I thought of Tommy, of the responsibility I had to keep him safe. We didn't know if this person was friendly or desperate enough to be dangerous. I motioned for Tommy to stay low and quiet as I moved towards the back door. The lock we'd broken to get in now seemed like a glaring vulnerability. I positioned myself beside the door, bat raised, ready for whatever might come through. The doorknob turned slowly, then the door began to open. I held my breath, muscles tense, ready to swing. A figure started to step through, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic in their hand, a weapon. In that split second, I had to make a choice, fight or flight, protect what we had or risk it all. As the intruder's foot crossed the threshold, I made my decision. I swung the bat. The bat connected with a solid thud, and I heard a grunt of pain. The intruder stumbled backward, dropping what I now saw was a crowbar. In the dim light, I could make out the figure of a woman, her hands raised defensively. "Wait, please, I'm not infected," she cried out. I hesitated, bat still raised. She didn't move like one of the infected, but I couldn't be too careful. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name's Lisa," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm just looking for supplies. Please, I have a group. We have children with us." But didn't relax my guard. "How many in your group? Where are you holed up?" Lisa hesitated, clearly unsure whether to trust me. Finally, she spoke. "There's 6 of us. We're in a basement a few blocks from here. 2 adults, 4 kids. We're running low on food." I felt a tug on my shirt and realized Tommy had come up behind me. "Mr. Dave," he whispered, "maybe we should help them." I looked at Tommy, then back at Lisa. The fear and desperation in her eyes were all too familiar. I made a decision. "Okay," I said, lowering the bat completely. "We have some supplies here. We can share." The relief on Lisa's face was palpable. As we gathered food and water to give her, she told us more about her group. They were neighbors who had banded together when the outbreak hit. They'd been hiding in a reinforced basement, but their supplies were running dangerously low. As Lisa prepared to leave with the supplies, I made another decision. "Wait," I said. "It's not safe out there alone. We'll come with you, help you, get this back to your group. Maybe we can work together, figure out a plan." Lisa nodded gratefully, and soon we were making our way through the dark streets, Tommy between us, all of us on high alert. The journey was tense, every shadow potentially hiding an infected, but we made it without incident. The basement where Lisa's group was hiding turned out to be under an old bookstore. As we entered, I saw the fear in the eyes of the other adult. A man named Mike turned to relief when he saw Lisa. The 4 children, ranging from about 5 to 12 years old, huddled together, watching us warily. Over the next few hours, as the kids ate and the adults talked, we shared our stories. Mike was a former soldier, which explained the relatively organized state of their hideout. Among the children were Lisa's 2 kids, Mike's daughter, and a boy they'd found alone on the street. As dawn approached, we began to form a plan. We couldn't stay in the basement forever. We needed to find a more secure location, preferably one of the safe zones we'd heard about on the radio. But first, I had to try to find my family. "The hospital where my wife works," I explained. "It might be one of the fortified centers they mentioned on the broadcast. If we can get there, we might find help, maybe even transportation to a safe zone." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "It's risky, but it's a solid plan. We can't stay here much longer anyway. Our noise and scent will attract the infected eventually." We spent the day preparing. Mike had a couple of guns with limited ammo, which he and Lisa would carry. I stuck with my bat, and we found a tire iron for Tommy to use if necessary, though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. We packed what supplies we could carry and tried to rest for the journey ahead. As night fell, we gathered the children and explained the plan. We would leave before dawn, hoping to cover as much ground as possible before the day got too hot. The hospital was about 5 miles away, a journey that would normally take a couple of hours. But in this new world, with streets blocked by abandoned cars and the ever-present threat of the infected, we had no idea how long it would take. I tried to sleep, but my mind was racing. What would we find at the hospital? Would Sarah be there? And what about our kids? The uncertainty was almost unbearable. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, Mike was shaking me awake. It was time to go. We moved silently through the pre-dawn darkness, Mike leading, Lisa bringing up the rear, with me and Tommy in the middle with the other kids. The streets were eerily quiet. The only sounds are soft footsteps and the occasional distant moan of an infected. As the sky began to lighten, we found ourselves in increasingly unfamiliar territory. The landscape of the city had changed dramatically in just a few days. Barricades blocked some streets while others were clogged with abandoned vehicles. We had to backtrack several times, each detour adding to our journey and our anxiety. About 2 hours into our trek, we heard a sound that made us all freeze. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd heard before. Mike signaled for us to take cover behind an overturned bus. Peering around the edge, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was one of the infected, but different from any I'd seen before. It was larger, more muscular, its skin a sickly gray color. It moved with a terrible purpose, sniffing the air as if hunting. Mike cursed under his breath. "They're evolving," he whispered, "getting stronger, smarter." We watched in horrified silence as the creature moved down the street, thankfully away from us. Once it was out of sight, we resumed our journey, now even more on edge. The sun was high in the sky when we finally caught sight of the hospital, but any relief I felt quickly vanished. The area around the hospital was a war zone. Military vehicles formed a perimeter, but beyond them, a horde of infected threw themselves against the barricades. We crouched behind a burned-out car, assessing the situation. "There's no way we're getting through that," Lisa said, her voice filled with despair. I refused to give up. We'd come too far. "There has to be a way," I insisted. "Maybe we can find another entrance or signal the soldiers somehow." As we debated our options, Tommy tugged on my sleeve. "Mr. Dave," he said, pointing to a nearby building. "Look." I followed his gaze and felt a surge of hope. It was a parking garage connected to the hospital by an elevated walkway. If we could get up there, we might be able to bypass the infected horde. Mike saw it too. "Good eye, kid," he said to Tommy. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot." We made our way to the parking garage, moving as quietly as possible. The entrance was clear, but as we started up the ramps, we could hear movement above us. Infected. We proceeded cautiously, Mike and Lisa with their guns ready, me with my bat. We encountered a few infected on the way up, but managed to take them out quietly. The kids were terrified, but holding it together, following our instructions to stay quiet and close. Finally, we reached the level with the walkway. It was about 50 yards of open space to the hospital entrance. We could see soldiers on the other side, but also several infected roaming the area. "Okay," Mike whispered, "we're going to have to make a run for it. Lisa and I will take out as many as we can, but we need to move fast and stay together. Everyone ready?" We all nodded, too scared to speak. Mike counted down from 3, and then we ran. The next few minutes were chaos. The sound of gunshots filled the air as Mike and Lisa took down infected. I swung my bat at any that got too close. The kids ran as fast as they could, the older ones helping the younger. We were about halfway across when I heard Tommy cry out. I turned to see an infected had grabbed his ankle. Without thinking, I charged back, bringing my bat down on the creature's head with all my strength. Tommy scrambled to his feet and we ran. The sounds of the infected behind us getting louder. The soldiers at the entrance had spotted us now and were shouting, waving us forward. With a final burst of speed, we made it through the door. Soldiers slammed it shut behind us, the sound of infected bodies thudding against it, a grim reminder of how close we'd come. As we stood there, gasping for breath, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Dave?" I looked up, hardly daring to believe it. There, wearing scrubs and looking as exhausted as I felt, was Sarah, my wife. She was alive. As we embraced, tears streaming down both our faces, I knew that this was just the beginning. We were alive, we were together, but the world was still in chaos. The infected were evolving, resources were scarce, and nobody knew how long even this fortified hospital would hold. But in that moment, holding Sarah and looking at the group of survivors we'd brought here, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The reunion with Sarah was bittersweet. While I was overjoyed to find her alive and safe, the news she shared about our children sent my world spinning again. They weren't at the hospital. The school had been evacuated early in the outbreak, but no one knew where the children had been taken. Sarah had been working non-stop since the crisis began, unable to leave the hospital to search for them. As we talked, soldiers ushered us deeper into the hospital. The corridors were crowded with survivors and medical staff. The air was thick with fear and desperation. We were led to a large conference room that had been converted into a makeshift briefing area. A stern-faced military officer introduced himself as Colonel Richards. He explained that the hospital was one of several fortified locations in the city, but resources were stretched thin. "We're holding for now," he said, "but we can't stay here indefinitely. We're organizing an evacuation to a more secure facility outside the city." The news should have been a relief, but all I could think about was our missing children. "We can't leave," I protested. "Our kids are still out there somewhere." Colonel Richards' expression softened slightly. "I understand, sir, but we have to think about the greater good. We've lost contact with most of the evacuation centers. The city is falling. If we don't leave soon, we might not get another chance." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Dave, he's right. We don't even know where to start looking. At least if we get to the secure facility, we might be able to access more information. Maybe find out where the school evacuated to." I knew they were right, but the thought of abandoning the search for our children felt like a physical pain. Before I could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the building. Barking orders Colonel Richards. We followed the stream of people into the hallway. Soldiers were running towards the entrance, and I could hear gunfire in the distance. "The perimeter's been breached," someone shouted. "They're inside the building." Panic erupted. People started pushing and shoving, trying to get away from the entrance. I held on to Sarah's hand tightly, making sure Tommy and the rest of of our group stayed close. We were swept along with the crowd, ending up in a large cafeteria area. Medical staff were trying to organize people, directing them towards emergency exits, but it was chaos. I could hear the sounds of fighting getting closer. The infected had made it inside and they were coming for us. Suddenly, a group of soldiers burst into the cafeteria, some of them clearly injured. "We can't hold them," one shouted. "Everyone needs to evacuate now." Colonel Richards appeared, his uniform spattered with blood. "We're initiating Protocol Omega," he announced. "All personnel, get to the helipad on the roof. We have choppers incoming for evacuation. Move." The cafeteria erupted into motion. People scrambled towards the stairwells, pushing and shoving in their desperation to escape. I looked at our group: Sarah, Tommy, Lisa, Mike, and the other children. We couldn't get separated in this chaos. "Listen," I shouted over the noise. "We need to stay together. Form a chain, hold hands, don't let go no matter what. We're going to make it out of here." We formed our human chain and joined the stream of people heading for the stairs. The journey up was nightmarish. The stairwell was packed, people stumbling and falling. Several times I had to pull Tommy up to keep him from being trampled. As we neared the top, we heard screams from below. The infected had reached the stairwell. Panic surged through the crowd, people pushing even harder to reach the roof. We finally burst out onto the helipad. The scene was chaos. Helicopters were landing and taking off, soldiers trying to organize the evacuation. The sky was filled with smoke from fires burning across the city. Colonel Richards was there, shouting orders. "Women and children first. We need to move quickly, people." I looked at Sarah, then at Tommy and the other kids in our group. "You need to go," I said, my heart breaking. "Get the kids to safety." Sarah's eyes widened. "No, I'm not leaving you. You have to," I insisted. "I'll be right behind you, but I need to know you and the kids are safe." Before she could argue further, a soldier grabbed her arm, ushering her and the children towards a waiting helicopter. I watched as they boarded. Sarah's eyes locked on mine until the chopper lifted off. More helicopters were incoming, but they couldn't land fast enough. The roof was getting crowded, and I could hear the sounds of fighting from the floors below. The infected were getting closer. Suddenly, the door to the stairwell burst open. A horde of infected spilled out onto the roof. Soldiers opened fire, but there were too many. People screamed, running in all directions. Some even jumped off the roof in their desperation to escape. In the chaos, I lost sight of Mike and Lisa. I hoped they had made it to a helicopter. I found myself backed up against the edge of the roof, a group of infected closing in. I gripped my bat tightly, knowing these might be my final moments. Just then, a helicopter appeared over the edge of the roof. A soldier leaned out, firing at the infected. "Jump!" he shouted at me. "Now!" I hesitated for a split second, then leaped. For a terrifying moment, I was in free fall. Then hands grabbed me, pulling me into the chopper. As we lifted away, I saw the roof of the hospital overrun with infected. As we flew over the burning city, I thought about Sarah and the kids, hoping they were safe. I thought about our children, still missing somewhere in this nightmare. And I realized that surviving the first 48 hours was just the beginning. The real fight for survival was only just starting. The helicopter ride was tense and silent. Nobody spoke. We were all lost in our own thoughts, processing the horrors we'd just escaped. I kept replaying the moment I'd said goodbye to Sarah and Tommy, hoping desperately that I'd made the right choice. After what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 minutes, I saw our destination. It was a large military base, surrounded by high walls topped with barbed wire. Spotlights swept the perimeter and I could see armed guards patrolling. It looked like a fortress. As we descended, I got a better view of the base. There were several large hangars, numerous smaller buildings, and what looked like a makeshift refugee camp with rows of tents. People were everywhere, moving with purpose or huddled in groups. The helicopter touched down, and we were quickly ushered off. Military personnel in hazmat suits approached us, holding strange devices. "Stand still," one ordered. "We need to scan." The scan was quick but unnerving. I held my breath until the soldier nodded. "He's clean, next." We were then directed to a large tent for processing. Inside, it was organized chaos. People were being registered, given identification, tags, and assigned to different areas of the base. I frantically scanned the crowds looking for Sarah and Tommy. "Name?" A tired-looking woman at a desk asked me. "Dave Mitchell," I replied, still searching the tent. "I'm looking for my wife and a boy who were evacuated before me. Sarah Mitchell and Tommy Johnson." The woman typed something into a computer. "Sarah Mitchell checked in about an hour ago. She's been assigned to the medical staff quarters. Tommy Johnson is in the children's area." She gave me directions to both locations. Relief washed over me. They had made it safely, but as I turned to go find them, the woman called me back. "Mr. Mitchell, it says here you have 2 children unaccounted for, is that correct?" The relief vanished, replaced by a gnawing worry. "Yes," I said. "My son and daughter. They were at school when the outbreak hit. We don't know where they were evacuated to." The woman's face softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry, sir. Sure, we'll add them to the missing persons database. If any information comes in, you'll be notified immediately. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The worry for my children threatened to overwhelm me, but I pushed it down. I needed to focus on the present, on the people I could help right now. I made my way to the children's area first. It was a large tent filled with bunk beds. Children of all ages were there, some crying, others playing quietly. I spotted Tommy sitting on a bed, looking lost and scared. When he saw me, his face lit up. He ran to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Mr. Dave, you made it." I hugged him back, realizing how attached I'd become to this brave little boy. "Of course I did, buddy. I promised I'd keep you safe, didn't I?" After making sure Tommy was settled and promising to check on him later, I headed to the medical staff quarters. I found Sarah in a small room she was sharing with 3 other doctors. When she saw me, she burst into tears, pulling me into a tight embrace. "I was so worried," she sobbed. "When I saw the hospital being overrun, I thought, I'm okay," I assured her, holding her close. "We're okay." We spent the next hour catching up, sharing our experiences of the past few days. Sarah had been working non-stop since the outbreak began, trying to treat the infected before we understood what we were dealing with. She'd seen colleagues turn, had to fight her way out of overrun wards. The trauma was evident in her eyes. As we talked, a grim reality settled over us. The world as we knew it was gone. This base felt safe for now, but for how long? And what about our children? Still out there somewhere. "We'll find them," Sarah said, sensing my thoughts. "We have to believe that." I nodded, wanting to believe it too. But the image of that evolved infected I'd seen on the way to the hospital kept flashing in my mind. How long before they became too strong, too smart for even our fortified defenses? As if on cue, alarms started blaring throughout the base. Sarah and I rushed outside. Soldiers were running towards the main gate, and I could hear gunfire in the distance. A nearby soldier shouted into his radio, "The outer perimeter has been breached. All civilians to the secure bunkers immediately." Sarah looked at me, fear in her eyes. "The children?" she said. I nodded. "I'll get Tommy. You help. Evacuate the medical area. Meet me at the bunker." As we split up, running in opposite directions, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long, brutal fight for survival. The first 48 hours had been a nightmare, but they were nothing compared to what was coming. The real test of survival was just beginning, and I knew that every decision, every action from this point on could mean the difference between life and death, not just for us, but for the future of humanity itself. I raced towards the children's area, my heart pounding in my ears. The base had descended into chaos, with people running in all directions. Soldiers were shouting orders, trying to maintain some semblance of control. As I approached the tent, I saw a group of volunteers ushering children out. "Tommy," I called out, scanning the sea of frightened faces. For a terrifying moment, I couldn't see him. Then I spotted him, clutching his backpack and looking around frantically. When he saw me, relief washed over his face. I grabbed his hand. "Come on, buddy. We need to get to the bunker." As we ran, I could hear the sounds of fighting getting closer. The infected had breached the outer perimeter, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they reached us. We joined the stream of people heading towards the bunkers. A massive, underground complex designed to withstand various would be one of them. We reached the bunker entrance, where soldiers were directing the flow of people. I kept a tight grip on Tommy's hand, determined not to lose him in the crowd. As we descended the steep stairs into the earth, the sounds of the surface battle became muffled. The bunker was a maze of corridors and rooms. People were being sorted into different areas based on skills and needs. I kept an eye out for Sarah, hoping she had made it down safely. "Mr. Dave," Tommy said, tugging on my sleeve. "I'm scared." I knelt down to his level. "I know, buddy, I'm scared too, but we're going to be okay. We just need to stay together and be brave. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, his young face set with determination. I marveled at his resilience. In the span of a few days, this kid had lost his parents, survived in a zombie-infested world, and was now facing yet another crisis. Yet here he was, still standing. We were directed to a large common area where families were being reunited. I scanned the room anxiously, looking for Sarah. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. The room was getting crowded, the air thick with fear and uncertainty. Just as I was about to go search for her, I heard her voice. "Dave! Tommy!" Sarah pushed. Through the crowd, her face etched with relief. We embraced, holding on to each other tightly. "Are you okay?" I asked, checking her for any signs of injury. She nodded. "I'm fine. We managed to evacuate everyone from the medical wing." She looked around the crowded room. "What's happening up there?" Before I could answer, a voice came over the loudspeaker. "Attention all personnel and civilians. The base is under attack by a large number of infected. We are implementing lockdown procedures. Please remain calm and follow all instructions from military personnel." A ripple of fear went through the crowd. People started talking all at once, their voices rising in panic. I could see children crying, adults arguing. The situation was on the brink of chaos. Suddenly, a stern voice cut through the noise. "Everyone quiet down." I turned to see Colonel Colonel Richards standing on a makeshift platform. The room fell silent. "I know you're scared," he continued, "but panic is our enemy right now. We have protocols in place for this situation. The bunker is secure, and we have supplies to last for months if necessary. Our job now is to stay calm and work together." His words seemed to have an effect. The tension in the room eased slightly. People started organizing themselves, setting up sleeping areas, distributing supplies. It was a testament to human resilience, our ability to adapt even in the face of unimaginable circumstances. Over the next few hours, we settled into a routine. Sarah was called to help set up a medical station. I volunteered to help with inventory, wanting to keep busy and make myself useful. Tommy stuck close to me, helping where he could. As we worked, I overheard snippets of conversations. Some people were optimistic, believing that the military would soon regain control. Others were less hopeful, talking about the fall of other cities, the rapid spread of the infection. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but worry for our missing children gnawed at me constantly. It was late in the evening when Colonel Richards called for another meeting. The common area fell silent as he began to speak. "I have an update on our situation," he said, his face grim. "The infected that breached our perimeter are unlike any we've encountered before. They're stronger, faster, and seem to possess a level of intelligence we haven't seen. We've managed to push them back for now, but at a heavy cost." A murmur went through the crowd. I thought back to the evolved infected I'd seen on the way to the hospital. Was this the next stage of the outbreak? Colonel Richards continued, "We're in contact with other surviving military installations. The situation is similar across the country. The infected are evolving, adapting at an alarming rate. We need to face the possibility that this bunker may be our home for the foreseeable future." The implications of his words sank in. We were trapped underground, while above us the world was being overrun by an enemy that was getting stronger by the day. And somewhere out there were our children, facing this nightmare alone. As the meeting broke up, Sarah pulled me aside. "Dave, we need to talk about the kids," she said, her voice low. "I can't just sit here knowing they're out there somewhere." I nodded, having had the same thoughts. "I know, but what can we do? We're locked in here, and even if we could get out, where would we start looking?" Sarah's eyes were filled with determination. "I've been talking to some of the other medical staff. There are rumors of a research facility not far from here. They might have more information about the evacuations, maybe even a cure for the infection. You want to try to reach this facility?" She nodded. "It's a long shot, I know, but I can't just sit here doing nothing. Our kids need us, Dave." I looked at Tommy, who was helping some younger children set up their sleeping areas. In the few days I'd known him, he'd become like family. The thought of leaving him behind tore at my heart, but then I thought of our own children, out there facing unimaginable dangers. "Okay," I said finally, "but we need a plan. We can't just walk out of here." Sarah squeezed my hand. "I know, we'll figure it out together." As we began to quietly plan our escape, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to embark on an even more dangerous journey. The relative safety of the bunker would soon be behind us, and we'd be facing a world that had become a nightmare. But as I looked at Sarah, saw the mix of fear and determination in her eyes, I knew we had no choice. Our children were out there, and we had to find them. Whatever it took, whatever dangers we had to face, we would bring our family back together. The next few days in the bunker were a blur of activity. On the surface, I helped with various tasks, from inventory management to assisting with the makeshift school for the children. But beneath it all, Sarah and I were meticulously planning our escape. We gathered supplies bit by bit, careful not to arouse suspicion. A few extra ration packs here, some medical supplies there. Sarah managed to get her hands on a detailed map of the area surrounding the base. We studied it whenever we could, memorizing routes and potential safe havens. The hardest part was deciding what to do about Tommy. The thought of leaving him behind was painful, but taking him with us on such a dangerous journey seemed irresponsible. In the end, we decided to tell Mike and Lisa our plans. They had become like family in the short time we'd known them, and we trusted them to look after Tommy if the worst should happen. On the night we planned to leave, I sat down with Tommy to explain. His eyes filled with tears as I told him we had to go. "But why can't I come with you?" he asked, his voice small and scared. I pulled him into a hug. "It's too dangerous, buddy. We need you to be brave and stay here where it's safe. Mike and Lisa will take care of you, and we'll be back before you know it, with my kids too. Then we'll all be together, okay?" He nodded against my chest, still sniffling. "You promise you'll come back?" "I promise," I said, hoping with all my heart that it was a promise I could keep. As the bunker settled down for the night, Sarah and I put our plan into action. We discovered a maintenance tunnel that led to the surface, one that was rarely used and lightly guarded. With the help of a few trusted friends who created a distraction, we managed to slip away unnoticed. The tunnel was dark and claustrophobic. We moved as quietly as we could, our hearts pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear. After what felt like hours, we reached the exit. Sarah picked the lock, a skill she'd surprisingly picked up from one of the nurses in the bunker, and we emerged into the cool night air. The scene that greeted us was one of devastation. The base, once a bustling hub of activity, was now a wasteland. Burnt-out vehicles littered the ground, buildings stood in ruins, and everywhere there were signs of the battle that had taken place. Dark stains on the ground that I tried not to think about too much. We moved quickly and quietly, making our way to the perimeter fence. The guard towers were empty, the spotlights dark. Whatever had happened here, it had overwhelmed the base's defenses completely. We found a section of fence that had been torn down and slipped through into the world beyond. The city sprawled before us, a dark and foreboding landscape. Fires burned in the distance, casting an eerie glow over the ruins of what had once been our home. The streets were littered with abandoned cars and debris, and somewhere out there were our children. "Where do we start?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight with emotion. I pulled out the map we'd brought. "The research facility is about 10 miles north of here. It's our best bet for information. We should be able to make it there by dawn if we move quickly." Sarah nodded, adjusting the backpack on her shoulders. "Let's go then. The sooner we find our kids, the sooner we can get back to Tommy." As we set off into the ruins of the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The streets seemed too quiet, the shadows too deep. I gripped my makeshift weapon, a metal pipe I'd managed to smuggle out of the bunker, a little tighter. We moved from cover to cover, always alert for any sign of the infected, but the city seemed deserted. It was almost more unnerving than if we'd been fighting our way through hordes of zombies. After a few hours of tense travel, we decided to hole up in an abandoned store to rest. Sharing a meager meal of dry rations, Sarah suddenly grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I listened intently. At first I heard nothing, then faintly, I caught it. A sound like shuffling feet coming from outside the store, and it was getting closer. We quickly packed up our things, ready to run if we had to. I peered out of a crack in the boarded-up window. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just one or two infected. It was a whole horde of them, moving with a purpose I hadn't seen before. They weren't shambling aimlessly, but marching, almost like an army. And at their head was one of the evolved infected, larger and more fearsome than the others. I turned to Sarah, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to move, now." As we slipped out the back of the store, I realized that our quest to find our children had just become even more dangerous. The infected were organized now, hunting in packs. The city was their domain, and we were the intruders. The research facility suddenly seemed very far away, and the chances of finding our children felt slimmer than ever. But we had no choice but to press on. Somewhere out there, our kids were waiting for us, and we would find them no matter what horrors we had to face. We slipped out of the store's back entrance, our hearts pounding in our chests. The horde of infected was moving down the main street, their eerie, synchronized movements sending chills down my spine. Sarah and I ducked into an alley, pressing ourselves against the cold brick wall. "We need to find another route," I whispered to Sarah. She nodded, pulling out our map. In the dim light, we could barely make out the streets, but we managed to plot a course that would hopefully keep us away from the main roads. As we moved through the shadowy back alleys of the city, I couldn't shake the image of that evolved infected leading the horde. It was as if they were becoming more than just mindless creatures driven by hunger. They were organizing, strategizing. The thought was terrifying. We made slow progress through the night, constantly backtracking and hiding to avoid roaming groups of infected. By the time the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, we were exhausted but still miles from our destination. "We need to find somewhere to rest," Sarah said, her voice strained with fatigue. I nodded, scanning our surroundings. We were in what used to be a residential area, rows of houses lining quiet streets. Most of them looked abandoned, doors hanging open, windows broken. There, I pointed to a house that seemed relatively intact. "Let's check it out." We approached cautiously, weapons at the ready. The front door was locked, which was a good sign. Using a credit card, I managed to jimmy the lock open. We stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind us. The house was dark and musty, but appeared untouched by the chaos outside. We did a quick sweep, checking every room for any signs of infected or other survivors. Once we were sure it was clear, we allowed ourselves to relax slightly. "We should be safe here for a few hours," I said, setting down our backpacks. Sarah nodded, already rummaging through the kitchen cupboards for anything useful. As Sarah prepared a meager meal from our rations and some canned goods we found, I took stock of our supplies. We had enough food and water to last another day, or two if we were careful. Our medical supplies were limited, mostly just basic first aid items. And our weapons, a pipe for me and a kitchen knife for Sarah, felt woefully inadequate against the horrors we'd seen. We ate in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't help but think about our children, wondering where they were, if they were safe. And Tommy, back in the bunker, had they discovered we were missing yet? What would happen to him if we didn't make it back? After we 48? Sarah insisted on taking the first watch while I got some sleep. I wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. I lay down on the dusty couch in the living room, my pipe clutched to my chest. I must have been more tired than I realized because the next thing I knew, Sarah was shaking me awake. "Dave," she whispered urgently, "someone's outside." I was instantly alert, sitting up and straining my ears. Sure enough, I could hear movement outside the house, but it didn't sound like the infected. These were careful, deliberate movements. We crouched by the window, peering out through a gap in the curtains. What I saw made my heart race. 3 people were moving down the street, checking houses as they went. They were alive, uninfected, and heavily armed. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered. "They could help us." I hesitated. In the world we now lived, and other survivors could be just as dangerous as the infected, but we were desperate for information, for help in finding our children. Before I could decide, one of the group spotted our movement in the window. "Hey, we see you in there. Come out slowly with your hands up." Sarah and I exchanged a look. We had no choice now. Slowly, we opened the front door, stepping out with our hands raised. The 3 survivors approached cautiously, their weapons trained on us. The one in front, a tall man with a scraggly beard, spoke. "Who are you? How long have you been here?" "I'm Dave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my wife, Sarah. We just got here a few hours ago. We're looking for our children." The man's expression softened slightly at the mention of children. He lowered his weapon, gesturing for the others to do the same. "I'm John," he said. "This is Maria and Alex. We're part of a survivor group holed up in a warehouse a few miles from here." Relief washed over me. Other survivors, an organized group. Maybe they could help us. "We're trying to reach the research facility to the north," Sarah said. "We heard there might be information there about evacuations." John's face darkened. "The research facility? That place is bad news. It's crawling with infected, and not just the regular kind. Something went wrong there, something that made the infected evolve faster." My heart sank. Our one lead, our hope for finding our children, and it was too dangerous to approach. "What can we do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Our kids are out there somewhere." John exchanged looks with his companions. "Look," he said after a moment, "why don't you come back to our camp? We have more supplies, better weapons. Maybe we can help you figure out another way to find your kids." Sarah and I looked at each other. It was a risk trusting strangers in this new world, but we were out of options and running out of supplies. Slowly, I nodded. "Okay," I said, "we'll come with you." As we gathered our things and prepared to leave with John's group, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. We were putting our trust, our lives in the hands of people we'd just met. But what choice did we have? Our children were out there, and we'd do anything to find them. The journey to John's camp was tense. We moved quietly through the streets, always on alert for infected or other threats. John and his group were clearly experienced, communicating with hand signals and moving with practiced efficiency. As we walked, Maria fell into step beside me. "So, you were in the military bunker?" she asked quietly. I nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" She smiled grimly. "We've seen others like you. The bunker was overrun about a week ago. Those who escaped have been trickling into the city." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. The bunker overrun? What about Tommy, Mike, and Lisa? All those people we'd left behind? I shared a horrified look with Sarah, seeing my own fears reflected in her eyes. Before we could ask more questions, John held up a hand, signaling us to stop. Ahead, I could see movement. A group of infected was shambling down the street, led by one of the larger, more intelligent ones. "Damn," John muttered. "They're expanding their territory. We need to find another way around." We backtracked, taking a circuitous route through abandoned buildings and overgrown backyards. It added hours to our journey, but we managed to avoid any direct confrontations with the infected. As the sun began to set, we finally reached John's camp. It was an old warehouse fortified with makeshift barricades and guard towers. As we approached, I could see people moving on the roof, keeping watch. A voice called down from above. "John, that you?" "Yeah, it's us," John called back. "We've got 2 new people with us. They're clean." The large metal door of the warehouse creaked open, and we were ushered inside. The interior was a hive of activity. People were everywhere, sorting supplies, repairing equipment, tending to wounded. It was a far cry from the sterile, organized environment of the military bunker. John led us to a quieter area where a group of people were gathered around a large map spread out on a table. An older woman looked up as we approached, her eyes sharp and assessing. "John, report," she said briskly. "The infected are pushing further into the city, Carol," John replied. "We had to take the long way back. Oh, and we found these 2. He gestured to Sarah and me. "They're looking for their kids. Came from the military bunker." Carol's eyebrows. "Shrito, the bunker? We heard it fell. How did you get out?" Briefly, we explained our situation, our plan to reach the research facility, and what we'd learned about its dangers. Carol listened intently, her expression grave. "You're right to avoid that place," she said when we finished. "We've lost good people trying to scout it out. Whatever happened there, it's the epicenter of these evolved infected." My heart sank. "Then what can we do? Our children are out there somewhere. We can't just give up." Carol was quiet for a moment, studying the map. Finally, "We've been gathering intel on evacuation routes and safe zones. It's not much, but it's a start. If you're willing to help us, we'll help you look for your children." Sarah and I exchanged a look. It wasn't the quick solution we'd hoped for, but it was something, a chance. "What do you need us to do?" I asked. Carol pointed pointed to an area on the map. "We need to secure a supply line from the old shopping district. If you can help with that, we'll start going through our information. See if we can find any leads on your kids." It was a deal, a chance to be proactive in our search while also helping others. As we settled into the camp that night, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. But as I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the camp around me, I couldn't shake a nagging worry. We were committing ourselves to this group, this place. What if it meant missing a chance to find our children? What if, while we were here helping secure supply lines, our kids were out there needing us? I looked over at Sarah, her face troubled even in sleep, and made a silent promise. We would find our children, no matter what it took. This was just a temporary stop on our journey. We had to believe that. As I finally drifted off to sleep, my dreams were filled with images of our children, lost and alone in a world overrun by the infected. And somewhere in the distance, I could hear the ominous sound of an evolved infected, leading its horde ever closer. The next morning, we were woken early by the bustle of the camp. Carol had assigned us to a supply run team, led by Maria. As we geared up, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and dread. This would be our first real mission since leaving the bunker. Maria handed us each a handgun. "I hope you know how to use these," she said. I nodded, thinking back to the basic firearms training we'd received in the bunker. It felt like a lifetime ago. Our team consisted of 6 people, Maria, Sarah, and me, plus 3 of the camp's regular scavengers named Ben, Lila, and Marcus. As we went over the plan, I studied our new companions. They all had a hardened look about them, like people who had seen too much in too short a time. The plan was straightforward but dangerous. We were to make our way to an abandoned supermarket about 2 miles from the camp. Intel suggested it hadn't been completely looted yet, and we desperately needed medical supplies and non-perishable food. As we left the relative safety of the camp, I felt exposed. The city streets were eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the occasional distant moan of an infected. We moved in formation, Maria at the lead, Marcus bringing up the rear. About halfway to our destination, Maria held up a hand signaling us to stop. She pointed silently to a side street. I peered around the corner and felt my blood run cold. A group of infected was gathered there, huddled around something I couldn't quite make out. "We need to go around," Maria whispered. Quietly, we began to backtrack, looking for another route. That's when things went wrong. Marcus, bringing up the rear, tripped over a piece of debris. The clatter seemed deafening in the quiet street. The infected heads snapped up, their milky eyes fixing on us, and then they charged. "Run!" Maria shouted, abandoning stealth. We took off down the street, the sounds of the pursuing infected spurring us on. I grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her along as we ran. Behind us, I could hear Marcus cry out. I turned to see him fall, the infected swarming over him. "Keep running!" Maria yelled, firing her gun at the approaching horde. We ran until our lungs burned, taking sharp turns and ducking through buildings in an attempt to lose our pursuers. Finally, we found ourselves in an abandoned office building, the infected's moans fading into the distance. As we caught our breath, the reality of what had just happened sank in. Marcus was gone, just like that. The others seemed shaken but unsurprised. This was the reality of their world now. "We need to keep moving," Maria said after a few minutes. "The supply run is still on." I wanted to argue, to say we should go back to the camp, but I knew she was right. We needed those supplies, and going back now would mean Marcus's death was for nothing. We continued on, more cautious than ever. When we finally reached the supermarket, it loomed before us like a fortress. The windows were boarded up, the parking lot a maze of abandoned cars. "Stay close," Maria instructed as we approached the entrance. "We don't know what's inside." The interior of the store was dark and musty. Shelves had been overturned and there was evidence of previous looting. But as we moved deeper into the store, we found sections that were relatively untouched. We worked quickly, filling our bags with canned goods, medicines, and other essentials. Despite the tragedy earlier, I felt a glimmer of hope. These supplies would help a lot of us. A sound froze us in our tracks. It was a child's cry echoing from somewhere in the back of the store. Sarah's eyes met mine, a silent understanding passing between us. It could be a trap, but if there was even a chance it was a child in need, we had to help. "It could be dangerous," Maria warned, but she didn't stop us as Sarah and I moved towards the sound. We found the source in the store's back room. A young girl, no more than 7 or 8, was huddled in a corner. She looked up at us with terrified eyes. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, approaching slowly. "We're here to help. Are you alone?" The girl nodded, then pointed to a door on the far side of the room. "My brother," she whispered. "He's sick." I moved to the door, opening it cautiously. The smell hit me first, a sickly sweet odor that I'd come to associate with the infected. On the floor lay a boy, maybe 12 years old. His skin was pale and clammy, his breathing labored. "Sarah," I called, my voice tight. She came over, taking in the scene with a doctor's eye. "He's infected," she said quietly. "Early stages, but it's progressing fast." The reality of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. This boy was turning and his sister was trapped here with him. We couldn't leave them, but bringing an infected back to the camp was out of the question. "What do we do?" I asked, dread dreading the answer. Sarah's face was grim. We can make him comfortable, give him something to ease the pain, but we can't save him, and we can't leave his sister here. The next hour was one of the hardest of my life. We explained the situation to the girl, whose name was Emily. She refused to leave her brother's side, even as his condition worsened. Sarah administered a strong sedative, ensuring the boy wouldn't suffer. As the life faded from the boy's eyes, Emily finally let us lead her away. My heart broke for her, for the innocence lost in this brutal new world. We rejoined the others, Emily clinging to Sarah's hand. Maria took in the situation with a glance and nodded grimly. "Let's move out," she said. "It's not safe to linger." The journey back to the camp was tense. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, and Emily's occasional sniffles felt like beacons attracting the infected, but somehow we made it back without incident. At the camp, Carol listened to our report with a grim expression. The loss of Marcus was a blow, but the supplies we'd gathered would make a significant difference. And Emily, once checked for bites or signs of infection, was welcomed into the camp's small group of orphaned children. That night, as Sarah and I tried to rest, I couldn't shake the image of Emily's brother, of the life slipping away from him. It was a stark reminder of the stakes we were facing, of why finding our own children was so crucial. "We can't stay here much longer," I whispered to Sarah. "Every day we spend here is a day our kids are out there alone." Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting my own worry and determination. "I know, but we need more information, a solid lead. Rushing out blindly won't help anyone." She was right, of course, but the urge to act, to do something, anything, to find our children was overwhelming. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, my dreams were filled with images of our kids, alone and scared, calling out for us. The next few days fell into a routine. We helped with supply runs, fortifying the camp, and caring for the wounded. Sarah's medical skills made her invaluable, while I found myself assisting with security and planning. All the while, we pressed for any information about possible evacuation sites or survivor camps where our children might have been taken. Progress was slow, but bit by bit, we began to piece together a map of potential locations. One evening, about a week after we'd arrived at the camp, Carol called us to a meeting. Her face was grave as she spread out a map on the table. "We've got a problem," she said without preamble. "Our scouts have reported a massive horde of infected moving this way, more than we've ever seen before, and they're being led by multiple, evolved infected." The news sent a chill through the room. We'd all seen what even a small group of infected could do. A horde of this size could easily overwhelm the camp. "What are our options?" I asked, studying the map. Carol pointed to a location about 20 miles north. "There's an old military installation here. Our intel suggests it might still be operational. If we can reach it, we might find sanctuary." "And if it's not operational?" someone asked. Carol's expression was grim. "Then we'll have to find somewhere else, but we can't stay here. We don't have the numbers or the firepower to fend off a horde that size." As the others discussed logistics for the move, my mind was racing. 20 miles north would take us closer to some of the potential locations where our kids might be, but it would also mean risking everything on a desperate journey. I caught Sarah's eye across the room. She nodded slightly, understanding passing between us. This was our chance, perhaps our only chance, to continue our search. As the meeting broke up, Carol approached us. "I know you two have your own mission," she said quietly. "If you want to use this opportunity to break off on your own, I'll understand. We can spare some supplies." Her offer was tempting. The thought of finally being able to fully commit to our search was almost overwhelming. But as I looked around at the people of the camp, at Emily and the other orphaned children, I knew we couldn't just abandon them. "We'll stay with the group," I said, surprising myself a little. "At least until we reach the military installation. We're stronger together." Carol nodded, a hint of relief in her eyes. "Thank you. We'll leave at first light. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." As Sarah and I prepared for bed that night, the gravity of our situation weighed heavily on us. We were about to embark on a dangerous journey with no guarantee of safety at the end, and our children were still out there somewhere. "We'll find them," Sarah said, squeezing my hand. "Whatever it takes, we'll find them." I nodded, trying to believe it. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that our true test of survival was just beginning. The infected horde was coming, and with it, a new chapter in our fight to reunite our family and survive in this changed world. The morning of our departure came too soon. The camp was a flurry of activity as everyone packed what they could carry and prepared for the journey ahead. Sarah and I joined the others, our hearts heavy with the knowledge that we were leaving behind the first place we'd felt safe since the outbreak began. Carol gathered us all for a final briefing. "Remember, we move as a unit," she said, her voice firm. "No one gets left behind. If you see any sign of the infected horde, alert the group immediately. Our goal is to reach the military installation without engaging the enemy if possible." We set out just as the sun was rising, a long line of survivors snaking through the empty streets. I found myself near the middle of the group with Sarah beside me and Emily, the young girl we'd rescued, holding tightly to her hand. The child hadn't spoken much since we'd brought her to the camp, but she'd latched onto Sarah like a lifeline. The first few hours of our journey were tense but uneventful. We moved as quietly as possible, our eyes constantly scanning for threats. The city looked different in the daylight, somehow more desolate. Buildings that had had once been familiar landmarks now loomed over us like silent sentinels, their broken windows like empty eye sockets staring down at our procession. As we reached the outskirts of the city, we encountered our first major obstacle. The highway leading north was blocked by a massive pileup of vehicles, stretching as far as we could see. There was no way around it. We'd have to go through. "Spread out and search the vehicles," Carol ordered. "We need to find a path through this mess, and keep an eye out for anything useful." We broke into smaller groups, carefully picking our way through the twisted metal. Sarah, Emily, and I found ourselves searching an overturned bus. As we climbed inside, the stale air and eerie silence made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Look," Sarah whispered, pointing to a backpack wedged under a seat. I reached for it, hoping for supplies, but as I pulled it free, I felt my heart drop. It was a child's backpack, covered in cartoon characters. Inside, we found a lunchbox, some school books, and a small stuffed animal. Emily's eyes widened at the sight of the toy. Without a word, Sarah handed it to her. The girl clutched it to her chest, the first sign of comfort she'd shown in days. As we exited the bus, a shout from up ahead caught our attention. "We've got a path," someone called, "but it's narrow. We'll have to go single file." We began to make our way through the maze of vehicles. The path was treacherous, with jagged metal protruding at every turn. More than once, someone stumbled or cut themselves on the wreckage. Sarah moved from person to person, treating cuts and scrapes as best she could with our limited supplies. We were about halfway through when a scream pierced the air. It came from near the back of our group. In an instant, chaos erupted. People began pushing forward, panic spreading like wildfire. "Hold your positions," Carol shouted from somewhere ahead. "What's happening back there?" I pushed my way towards the source of the scream, my heart pounding. As I reached the rear of our group, I saw the cause of the panic. A man was on the ground, his leg pinned beneath a fallen motorcycle, and beyond him, emerging from between the wrecked cars, were the infected. It wasn't a large group position. Trapped in single file, it might as well have been an army. I rushed to the fallen man's side, grabbing the motorcycle and straining to lift it. "Help me," I shouted to those nearby. 2 others joined me, and together we managed to free the man's leg. But it was clearly broken. He wouldn't be able to walk. The infected were getting closer, their moans growing louder. I made a split-second decision. "Give me your gun," I said to the man with the broken leg. He handed it over without question. "Get him out of here," I told the others. "I'll hold them off and catch up." Sarah appeared at my side, her face set with determination. "I'm staying with you," she said. There was no time to argue. As the rest of the group continued forward, Sarah and I took up positions at the rear. The infected reached us moments later. I fired, the sound of the gunshot echoing off the wrecked vehicles. The first infected fell, but others kept coming. We fought desperately, using the narrow path to our advantage. The infected could only come at us 1 or 2 at a time, but they just kept coming. My arms ached from the recoil of the gun, and I knew we were running low on ammo. Just as I was starting to think this might be the end, I heard shouting from up ahead. A group led by Maria had come back to help. With their added firepower, we managed to take down the last of the infected, but we knew this was just the beginning. The gunfire would have attracted more. We had to move, and fast. We rejoined the main group, who had managed to clear the vehicle pileup. Carol took one look at us and knew the situation was dire. "We need to pick up the pace," she said. "That horde won't be far behind now." We moved as quickly as we could, but the man with the broken leg slowed us down. A few people fashioned a makeshift stretcher, but it was clear we wouldn't be able to maintain this speed for long. As the sun began to set, we found ourselves in unfamiliar territory. The urban sprawl had given way to more industrial areas. Factories and warehouses loomed around us, their empty parking lots offering little in the way of cover or shelter. Carol called for a brief rest, allowing us to catch our breath and take stock of our supplies. As I sipped from my water bottle, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows seemed to move in the fading light, and every distant sound made me tense up. Sarah must have sensed my unease. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch reassuring. "We're going to make it," she said softly. "We have to." I nodded, trying to believe it, but as I looked around at our ragged group, at the fear etched on every face, I wondered how much more we could take. We'd lost people along the way, to injury and exhaustion. Those who remained were running on fumes, pushed to their limits by the constant threat of the infected. As we prepared to move out again, a sound in the distance made us all freeze. It was a low, rumbling moan, unlike anything we'd heard before, and it was answered by hundreds, maybe thousands of similar sounds. Carol's face went pale. "The horde," she whispered. "They're closer than we thought." Panic threatened to overtake the group, but Carol's steady voice cut through the fear. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "We are not giving up. That military installation is our best hope, and it's not far now. We move fast, we stay quiet, and we stick together. Understood?" There were nods all around, fear giving way to grim determination. determination. As we set out again, I found myself at the rear of the group with Maria. We walked in silence for a while, both of us straining our ears for any sign of the approaching horde. "You know," Maria said quietly, "when this all started, I never thought I'd last this long. But here we are still fighting." I glanced at her, surprised by the sudden conversation. "What keeps you going?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Hope, I guess. Hope that somewhere out there things are better. That all this struggle means something." Her words struck a chord in me. Isn't that what Sarah and I were holding on to? The hope that our children were out there, that we'd find them and somehow make a life in this new world. As we walked, the industrial area began to give way to more open terrain. In the distance, I could make out the silhouette of what looked like a large compound. The military installation, it had to be. A surge of energy seemed to run through the group as people realized how close we were to our goal. But with it came a new tension. What if the installation wasn't the sanctuary we hoped for? What if it was overrun like so many other places we'd seen? We were about a mile from the compound when we heard it. The sound of gunfire, distant but unmistakable. And it was coming from the direction of the installation. Carol held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. "Maria, Dave," she called. "Scout ahead." Sarah squeezed my hand as I prepared to leave. "Be careful," she whispered. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Maria and I moved forward, using what little cover we could find. As we got closer to the installation, the sounds of battle became clearer. There was definitely a fight going on. We crouched behind an abandoned truck, peering out at the scene before us. The military installation was a fortress, surrounded by high walls topped with barbed wire. But those walls were under assault. A massive horde of infected threw themselves at the defenses while gunfire from the walls cut them down in waves. But it wasn't just regular infected. Among the horde, I could see the larger, more aggressive forms of the evolved infected. They seemed to be directing the attack, using tactics I wouldn't have thought possible for mindless creatures. "This is bad," Maria muttered. "If that place falls, we're done for." As we watched, a section of the wall began to crumble under the relentless assault. Infected poured through the breach, and the defending gunfire became more frantic. We had a choice to make. We could turn back, try to find another way, but with the horde behind us and no supplies, that was almost certain death. Or we could make a run for the installation, try to get inside before it was completely overrun. As Maria and I looked at each other, the decision was clear in both our eyes. We had to try. We raced back to the group, quickly explaining the situation to Carol. Her face was grim as she processed the information. "We don't have a choice," she said finally. "We make a run for it. Everyone who can fight, form a perimeter around the injured and the children. We hit that breach in the wall with everything we've got. It's our only shot." As we prepared for what might be our final push, I found Sarah in the crowd. We didn't need words. We just held each other for a moment, drawing strength from each other's presence. "If we get separated," I started to say, but Sarah cut me off. "We won't," she said fiercely. "We're in this together, all the way." I nodded, swallowing hard. As Carol gave the signal to move out, I gripped my weapon tightly. The military installation loomed ahead, our last hope in a world gone mad. And beyond it, somewhere, our children were waiting. We had to make it. We had to survive. As we began our desperate charge towards the breached wall, the roar of the infected horde filled the air. This was it, the moment that would determine not just our fate, but perhaps the fate of humanity itself. In that moment, facing impossible odds, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, we would face it together, and we would not go down without a fight. The charge towards the military installation was a blur of chaos and adrenaline. Our group moved as one, those of us with weapons forming a protective ring around the injured and children. The roar of the infected horde grew louder with each step, spurring us on. As we neared the breached wall, the full scale of the battle became apparent. Infected swarmed through the gap, while defenders on the walls fought desperately to hold them back. Gunfire rang out continuously, cutting down infected but seemingly making no dent in their numbers. "Push through," Carol shouted over the din. "Head for the breach." We hit the mass of infected like a battering ram. I found myself at the forefront, swinging my weapon with all my might. The world narrowed to a series of brutal, life-or-death moments. An infected lunged at me, its jaws snapping. I brought my gun down on its head, feeling the sickening crunch of bone. Another came from the side, and I barely managed to dodge its grasp. Sarah was at my side, her face set in grim determination as she fought. We moved in sync, covering each other, inching our way towards the breach. Around us, our companions fought with equal ferocity. Maria's gun blazed, taking down infected with deadly accuracy. Even Emily, the young girl we'd rescued, was helping, stabbing at infected legs with a sharpened stick. As we neared the wall, a deafening roar cut through the chaos. An evolved infected, larger and more fearsome than any I'd seen before, burst through the breach. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its muscles rippling under gray, mottled skin. Its eyes, unlike the milky white of regular infected, gleamed with malevolent intelligence. The creature's gaze locked onto our group. With terrifying speed, it charged towards us. swatting aside both infected and humans alike. "Scatter!" Carol yelled, but it was too late. The evolved infected plowed into our formation, sending people flying. I was knocked off my feet, my head spinning from the impact. As I struggled to stand, I saw the creature grab Maria, lifting her off the ground effortlessly. Without thinking, I charged at the monster, ramming my shoulder into its midsection. It was like hitting a brick wall, but the impact was enough for air but alive. The evolved infected turned its attention to me, its mouth opening in a roar that I felt in my bones. I backpedaled, trying to put some distance between us, but I knew I couldn't outrun it. Just as it was about to reach me, a hail of gunfire erupted from the wall. The evolved infected staggered under the assault, giving me a chance to retreat. I looked up to see soldiers on the wall, their weapons trained on the creature. "Move! Move!" a voice shouted from the breach. More soldiers poured out, forming a defensive line. "Civilians, get inside now." Our group didn't need to be told twice. We rushed through the breach, the soldiers covering our retreat. As I passed through the wall, I turned back to see the evolved infected fall under the combined firepower of the defenders. But even as it went down, more infected poured in behind it. Inside the compound, it was organized chaos. Medics rushed to treat the wounded, while soldiers hurried to reinforce the breach. A stern-faced officer approached us. "I'm Colonel Reeves," he barked. "Who's in charge here?" Carol stepped forward, quickly explaining our situation. The colonel nodded grimly. "You're lucky you made it," he said. "We've been under siege for, days. This was their biggest push yet." He turned to address the group. "We'll get you all processed and assigned quarters. Anyone with medical or military experience, report to the command center. We need all hands on deck." As the group dispersed, following the instructions of various personnel, Sarah and I found ourselves momentarily alone. We embraced the reality of what we'd just survived washing over us. "We made it," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky with relief and exhaustion. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. We were safe, for now, but our children were still out there somewhere. Over the next few hours, we were processed, given medical checkups, and assigned to temporary quarters. The military installation was vast, a small city unto itself, but everywhere I looked, I saw signs of strain. Supplies were clearly running low, and the faces of both soldiers and civilians were etched with exhaustion and fear. As night fell, Sarah and I found ourselves in a small room that we were sharing with two other families. As we settled in for the night, the sounds of ongoing battle outside the walls were a constant reminder of the precarious nature of our safety. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with everything we'd been through and the challenges that still lay ahead. How were we going to find our children from here? Would the military have any information about other survivors, other safe zones? Just before dawn, an alarm blared through the compound. Sarah and I were on our feet instantly, fearing another attack, but the announcement that followed was even more chilling. "Attention all personnel," a voice crackled over the speakers. "We have confirmed reports of infected inside the compound. This is not a drill. Implement containment protocol immediately." The infected had breached the walls. Our safe haven was no longer safe. Chaos erupted in the corridors as people rushed to follow evacuation procedures. Sarah and I joined the crowd, trying to stay together in the press of bodies. Soldiers shouted orders, directing people towards designated safe zones within the compound. As we turned a corner, we came face to face with the horror we'd been dreading. A group of infected, their eyes wild and hungry, charged down the hallway towards us. Screams erupted from the crowd as people pushed and shoved in their desperation to escape. I grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her into a side corridor. We ran, the sounds of pursuit close behind us. The layout of the compound was confusing, and in our panic, we quickly became lost. We found ourselves in what looked like a research area, filled with laboratories and strange equipment. As we paused to catch our breath, a sound from one of the labs caught my attention. It was a whimper, barely audible over the alarms and distant screams. Sarah heard it too. We approached the lab cautiously, peering through the window in the door. What we saw inside made my blood run cold. A group of people, some in lab coats, others in military uniforms, were huddled in a corner. But it wasn't them that held my attention. It was the creatures in the center of the room. They looked like infected, but different, more evolved, more terrifying than anything we'd seen before. One of the scientists saw us and motioned frantically for us to leave, but before we could move, one of the creatures turned, its gaze locking onto us through the window. With inhuman speed, it charged at the door. We barely had time to jump back before it smashed through, glass and metal flying everywhere. Sarah and I ran, the creature's roar echoing behind us. We sprinted through the corridors, taking random turns in our desperation to escape. The hallway seemed to slow it down. We managed to stay just ahead of it, but I knew we couldn't keep this pace up for long. Just as I felt my strength starting to fail, we burst through a door and found ourselves outside. We were in some kind of courtyard surrounded by high walls, and we weren't alone. A group of soldiers was there, setting up what looked like heavy weaponry. They turned as we entered, their weapons raising. "Behind us!" I managed to gasp out. "Evolved? Infected." The soldiers' eyes widened, but to their credit, they reacted instantly. They shoved us behind their line just as the creature burst through the door. What followed was a battle unlike anything I'd seen before. The evolved infected was incredibly strong and fast, shrugging off wounds that would have killed a normal person instantly. The soldiers fought with everything they had, but they were being overwhelmed. In the chaos, I spotted something that gave me a glimmer of hope. A helicopter was on the other side of the courtyard, its rotors already spinning. Up, an evacuation was underway. "Sarah," I shouted over the noise of battle, pointing at the helicopter. She nodded, understanding immediately. We made a run for it, zigzagging across the courtyard as gunfire and the roars of the infected filled the air. Just as we neared the helicopter, I heard Sarah cry out. I turned to see her stumble, her ankle twisted from a hidden hole in the ground. I ran back to her, helping her up. The helicopter was so close, but the sounds of battle were getting closer. The evolved infected had broken through the soldiers' line and was heading straight for us. Time seemed to slow down. I looked at the approaching monster, then at the helicopter. We weren't going to make it, not both of us, not with Sarah injured. In that moment, I made a decision. I scooped Sarah up in my arms and used every last ounce of strength to run towards the helicopter. The creature was right behind us, so close. I could hear its ragged breathing. Just as I felt its claws graze my back, we reached the helicopter. Hands reached out, pulling Sarah in. I pushed her forward, then turned to face the creature. I had to buy them time to take off. The evolved infected crashed into me, sending us both tumbling to the ground. We grappled, its inhuman strength nearly overwhelming me. I could hear Sarah screaming my name, the sound of the helicopter rotors getting louder as the creature pinned me down, its jaws snapping inches from my face. I had one last desperate thought. Our children. I had to survive, had to find them. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to get my legs under the creature. Using all my strength, I kicked up, sending it flying over me. I scrambled to my feet, running for the helicopter that was now lifting off. With a desperate leap, I grabbed onto the landing skid. I hung there, dangling precariously as the ground fell away beneath me. Hands reached down, grabbing me and pulling me to safety. As I collapsed onto the floor of the helicopter, gasping for breath, I looked out to see the military installation shrinking below us. The evolved infected stood in the courtyard, its roar of frustration barely audible over the sound of the rotors. We had escaped, but at a terrible cost. The one place we thought might be safe had fallen, and now, as we flew into an uncertain future, I couldn't help but wonder, if this was happening here, what hope did we have of finding our children? What hope did humanity have of surviving this nightmare? As the helicopter carried us away from the chaos below, I held Sarah close, both of us trembling from the narrow escape. We were alive, but we were back where we started, alone in a world overrun by the infected, with no idea where to go next. The search for our children, and for any semblance of safety, would have to begin anew, and this time we were running out of options. The helicopter ride was tense and silent. Nobody spoke as we flew over the ravaged landscape below. I held Sarah close, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The adrenaline from our narrow escape was wearing off, leaving us exhausted and numb. After what felt like hours, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. We're approaching a temporary safe zone. It's not much, but it's all we've got right now. I peered out the window as we descended. The safe zone turned out to be a small town, surrounded by hastily erected barricades. As we landed in what used to be a high school football field, I could see people moving about, some in military uniforms, others clearly civilians. We were quickly ushered off the helicopter and into a makeshift processing center in the school gymnasium. The place was crowded with survivors, all looking as shell-shocked as we felt. Military personnel moved through the crowd, taking names and assigning people to various areas. A tired-looking soldier approached us. "Names?" he asked, clipboard in hand. "Dave and Sarah We're looking for our children. They were evacuated from their school when the outbreak started. Do you have any information on survivor groups or evacuation centers?" The soldier's face softened slightly. "I'm sorry, but we don't have much information right now. Communications are down in most areas, but I'll make a note of it. If we hear anything, we'll let you know." It wasn't much, but it was all we had for now. We were assigned to a classroom that had been converted into a sleeping area. As we settled, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. How many times had we thought we'd found safety, only to have it ripped away? The next few days fell into a routine. We helped where we could, Sarah lending her medical expertise to the overworked doctors, while I assisted with fortifying the barricades. All the while, we kept our ears open for any news, any hint of where our children might be. It was on the fourth day that everything changed again. I was helping reinforce a section of the barricade when an alarm sounded. At first, I thought it was another infected attack, but the announcement that followed was even more chilling. "Attention, all personnel and civilians. We have reports of a large group of armed individuals approaching from the east. They are not military and have not responded to communication attempts. All able-bodied individuals report to your designated defense positions immediately." My heart raced as I rushed to find Sarah. Armed humans could be even more dangerous than the infected in this new world. I found her at the medical center, already preparing for potential casualties. "Dave," she said as soon as she saw me. "I heard the announcement. What's happening?" Before I could answer, the sound of gunfire erupted from the eastern barricade. The attack had begun. I grabbed a nearby weapon weapon, a shotgun that had seen better days, and joined the defenders at the barricade. The scene that greeted me was chaos. A large group of people, easily 100 strong, was assaulting our defenses. They were well armed and organized, moving with military-like precision. As we fought to hold them back, I couldn't help but wonder who these people were. Other survivors driven to desperation, or something worse? The battle raged for hours. Our defenses were holding, but barely. Just as it seemed we might push them back, a new sound cut through the gunfire. It was a sound I'd hoped never to hear again. The roar of the infected. A massive horde was approaching from the west, drawn by the noise of our battle. We were caught between two deadly forces with nowhere to run. In the chaos that followed, I lost track of Sarah. The eastern barricade fell, and our attackers poured in, only to be met by the wave of infected from the west. The safe zone had become a three-way battleground, with us caught in the middle. I fought my way through the melee, desperately searching for Sarah. Bodies fell around me, human and infected alike. The lines between friend and foe blurred as everyone fought for survival. Finally, I spotted her. Sarah was with a group of survivors trying to make their way to one of the emergency exit routes we'd planned. I fought to reach her, my world narrowing to that single goal. Just as I neared them, I saw one of our attackers take aim at the group. Without thinking, I threw myself forward, tackling Sarah to the ground just as the shot rang out. Pain exploded in my shoulder, but I had no time to dwell on it. "Dave!" Sarah cried, her eyes wide with fear as she saw the blood spreading across my shirt. "I'm okay," I grunted, though the pain was intense. "We need to move. Now." Supporting each other, we joined the group of survivors making a run for it. Behind us, the safe zone was falling. The infected had broken through and were now battling both us and our human attackers. We ran through the streets of the small town, the sounds of battle fading behind us. I was vaguely aware of others in our group, but my focus was entirely on putting one foot in front of the other, fighting through the pain and blood loss. As we reached the outskirts of town, a van screeched to a halt beside us. The door slid open, revealing Maria from our old survivor group. "Get in!" she shouted. We piled in, the van peeling away as soon as the last person was aboard. As we sped away from the fallen safe zone, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly, the adrenaline fading and the pain in my shoulder intensifying. Sarah was immediately in doctor mode, examining my wound. "The bullet went through clean," she said, her voice tight with worry. "But you're losing a lot of blood. We need to stop and treat this properly." Maria, who was driving, shook her head. "We can't stop yet. Those bastards who attacked us are right on our tail." As if to emphasize her point, gunfire erupted behind us. Our pursuers had vehicles of their own and were gaining on us. What followed was a harrowing chase through Maria drove like a woman possessed, taking sharp turns and off-road detours to try and lose our pursuers. The others in the van returned fire when they could, but we were outgunned and outnumbered. Just when it seemed we might shake them, our luck ran out. A shot took out one of our tires, sending the van into a spin. We crashed into a ditch, the impact sending waves of agony through my injured shoulder. "Everyone out!" Maria shouted. "We need to run!" We scrambled out of the wrecked van, making for the cover of a nearby forest. I could hear our pursuers closing in, their shouts carrying on the wind. As we ran deeper into the woods, my vision began to blur. The blood loss was taking its toll. I stumbled, nearly falling, but Sarah was there, supporting me. "Just a little further," she urged, though I could hear the fear in her voice. She knew as well as I did that I couldn't keep this up much longer. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the forest. It was a helicopter, coming in low over the trees. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope. Had the military found us? But as the helicopter came into view, I saw it wasn't military. It was sleek, black, and unmarked. It hovered over us, a spotlight pinning us in place. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Survivors, do not be afraid. We are here to help. We offer sanctuary and safety. Please, come with us." I looked at Sarah, seeing my own confusion and suspicion mirrored in her eyes. Who were these people? Could we trust them? But as the shouts of our pursuers grew closer and my strength continued to fade, I realized we didn't have much choice. It was either take a chance with these mysterious rescuers or face certain death at the hands of our attackers. As a rope ladder descended from the helicopter, I made my decision. "We have to go with them," I said to Sarah. "It's our only chance." She nodded, helping me to my feet. As we approached the ladder, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into the unknown once again. Who were these people? What did they want with us? And most importantly, would this finally lead us to our children? As we climbed into the helicopter, leaving behind the chaos below, I knew one thing for certain. Our journey was far from over. The world had changed, become more dangerous than we could have ever imagined, but we were still alive, still fighting. And as long as there was breath in my body, I would never stop searching for our children. children. The helicopter lifted off, carrying us to yet another uncertain future. But for the first time in what felt like ages, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the turning point we'd been waiting for. As we flew into the night, I held Sarah close, both of us exhausted but alive. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And somehow, someway, we would find our children and carve out a life in this new, terrifying world. The pain in my shoulder was a constant reminder of how close we'd come to death, but it also served as a testament to our will to survive. We had made it this far against impossible odds. We had faced hordes of infected, battled, evolved monstrosities and now escaped from hostile human forces. Each challenge had made us stronger, more determined. As I looked around at the other survivors, in the helicopter I saw the same determination in their eyes. We were all fighting for something, whether it was loved ones, the hope of a better future, or simply the primal drive to survive. In that moment I realized that this shared struggle had forged a bond between us all, stronger than any I had known before the outbreak. The helicopter flew on through the night, taking us to an unknown destination. But wherever we were going, whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that we would face them head-on, because in this new world, giving up wasn't an option. We would keep fighting, keep searching, keep hoping, for our children, for each other, and for the future of humanity itself. The helicopter ride seemed to stretch on for hours. My shoulder throbbed with every beat of my heart, but Sarah had managed to slow the bleeding with a makeshift bandage. As we flew, I drifted in and out of consciousness, the events of the past few days blurring together in a haze of pain and exhaustion. I was jolted awake by the feeling of descent. Looking out the window, I saw we were approaching what looked like a large compound nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains. The facility was unlike anything I'd seen since the outbreak began. It was pristine, untouched by the chaos that had engulfed the rest of the world. As we landed on a helipad, we were greeted by a team of people in hazmat suits. They quickly ushered us inside, separating us into groups. Despite my protests, they took Sarah in one direction and me in another, assuring us it was just for initial medical screenings. I was taken to a sterile room that looked like a cross between a hospital. A doctor, her face obscured by a mask and face shield, began treating my gunshot wound. As she worked, she explained that we were in a facility called Haven, a self-sustained research center that had been preparing for global catastrophes for years. "You're safe here," she said, her voice muffled by her mask. "We have defenses that can keep out both the infected and hostile human forces." I wanted to feel relieved, but after everything we'd been through, I couldn't shake my suspicion. "Why did you bring us here?" I asked. "What do you want from us?" The doctor paused in her work, her eyes meeting mine. "We're trying to save what's left of humanity," she said. "And to do that, we need survivors like you. People who have been out there, who have seen how the infected are evolving." Before I could ask more questions, a man in a crisp suit entered the room. He introduced himself as Dr. Emerson, the head of Haven. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his tone friendly but with an undercurrent of urgency. "I understand you and your wife have been searching for your children." My heart skipped a beat. "Yes," I said, sitting up despite the pain in my shoulder. "Do you have information about them?" Dr. Emerson's expression was unreadable. "We might," he said carefully, "but first, we need your help. The information we've gathered from you and the other survivors you arrived with is invaluable, but we need more. We need you to go back out there." I stared at him in disbelief. "Go back out? We just barely escaped with our lives." "I understand," Dr. Emerson said, holding up a hand, "but we're on the verge of a breakthrough, a cure for the infected. But to complete it, we need fresh samples from the evolved infected, the ones you encountered at the military base." My mind reeled. A cure. It seemed too good to be true, and yet if there was even a chance, "And if we do this for you," I said slowly, "you'll help us find our kids." Dr. Emerson nodded. "We have resources you can't imagine. If your children are out there, we'll find them." I wanted to discuss it with Sarah, to think it through, but I knew in my heart what our decision would be. We'd risk anything to find our children. "Okay," I said, "we'll do it." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah and I were reunited, and together we underwent intense training. We were introduced to cutting-edge weapons and equipment designed specifically to combat the infected. Other survivors from our group, including Maria, volunteered to join the mission. As we trained, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Haven seemed too perfect, too untouched by the horrors outside, and there were areas of the facility that were off-limits, guarded by armed personnel. What were they hiding? The night before our mission, Sarah and I lay in our assigned quarters, neither of us able to sleep. "Dave," Sarah whispered, "do you trust them?" I sighed, staring at the ceiling. "I don't know," I admitted, "but if there's a chance they can help us find the kids, we have to try." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I overheard some of the staff talking," she said hesitantly. "They mentioned something called Project Lazarus. It sounded ominous." Before I could respond, an alarm blared through the facility. A voice came over the intercom. "Security breach in Sector 7. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures." Sarah and I jumped out of bed, grabbing our weapons out of instinct. We could hear commotion in the hallway outside our room. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. The scene in the hallway was chaos. People were running in all directions, and I could hear gunfire in the distance. A group of armed guards ran past us, heading towards the source of the disturbance. "We should stay here," Sarah said, but I could see the curiosity and concern in her eyes that mirrored my own. "Let's just take a look," I said. "Maybe we can help." We followed the flow of people moving deeper into the facility. As we entered Sector 7, the scene that greeted us was one of horror and confusion. There were bodies on the floor, some in lab coats, others in military gear, and moving among them with terrifying speed and purpose were infected unlike any we'd seen before. These creatures were different from even the evolved infected we'd encountered outside. They moved with an almost human intelligence, using weapons and coordinating their attacks. As I watched, one of them operated a computer terminal with frightening proficiency. "What are they?" Sarah gasped beside me. Before I could respond, I felt a hand grab my arm. It was Dr. Emerson, his suit stained with blood, his eyes wild with fear. "You need to get out of here," he said urgently. "Take this." He shoved a flash drive into my hand. "It has everything. The truth about Haven, about Project Lazarus. You need to get it to the right people." "What's going on?" I demanded. "What are those things?" Dr. Emerson's face contorted. "They're the future," he said cryptically. "Or they were supposed to be. We thought we could control it, but we were wrong. So wrong." Before he could say more, one of the intelligent infected spotted us. It let out a chilling cry, alerting the others. Dr. Emerson shoved us towards an emergency exit. "Run!" he shouted. "And whatever you do, don't let them catch you." Sarah and I ran, the sounds of pursuit close behind us. We navigated through the winding corridors of Haven, the facility now feeling more like a maze than a sanctuary. Alarms blared, emergency lights flashed, and the sounds of battle echoed from all directions. We burst out of an exit into the cool night air. The mountains loomed around us, offering potential safety if we could reach them, but between us and freedom was a battlefield. Haven's security forces were engaged in a desperate fight against the escaped infected, and caught in the middle were terrified survivors. "We can't just leave them," Sarah said, gesturing to a group of civilians pinned down by infected. I nodded, readying my weapon. "Let's go." We fought our way across the compound, helping who we could. The training and equipment we'd received at Haven proved invaluable, allowing us to hold our own against the intelligent infected. But for everyone we took down, more seemed to appear. As we neared the perimeter fence, a familiar voice called, "Out!" It was Maria, leading a group of survivors towards a garage full of vehicles. "Over here!" she shouted. We altered course, fighting our way towards Maria's position. Just as we reached them, a massive explosion rocked the compound. I turned to see a fireball rising from the center of Haven. Whatever had been happening, in there, someone had decided it was better to destroy it all than let it fall into infected hands. "We need to go now!" Maria yelled, ushering people into an armored truck. As I helped Sarah into the vehicle, I saw a group of the intelligent infected break away from the battle, heading straight for us, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light fixed on us with terrifying focus. I jumped into the truck, slamming the door shut just as Maria floored the accelerator. We burst through the perimeter fence, the impact rattling my teeth. In the rearview mirror, I could see Haven burning, the battle still raging, and in the glow of the fires, I saw the intelligent infected watching our escape, their expressions unnervingly human. As we sped into the night, the adrenaline of our escape began to fade, replaced by a gnawing fear. What had we just witnessed? What were those things back there? And what secrets did the flash drive in my pocket hold? I looked at Sarah, saw the same questions and fears in her eyes. We had survived again, but at what cost? And what new horrors had we unwittingly become a part of? The truck rumbled on through the darkness, carrying us away from the burning remains of Haven. But as the facility disappeared behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were driving not towards safety, but into an even greater nightmare. Whatever Project Lazarus was, whatever Haven had been doing, it had changed the game. The infected were evolving faster than we could have imagined, and I feared that humanity's time might be running out. As the first light of dawn began to break over the mountains, I clutched the flash drive in my pocket. Whatever answers it held, whatever truth it revealed, I knew our journey was far from over. We had survived the fall of Haven, but the real battle for survival, for the future of humanity, was just beginning. We drove for hours, putting as much distance as possible between us and the burning remains of Haven. The armored truck was cramped, filled with shell-shocked survivors. No one spoke much, all of us trying to process what we'd just witnessed. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Maria finally pulled the truck over in a secluded area surrounded by dense forest. "We need to rest and regroup," she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. We piled out of the vehicle, stretching our stiff limbs. There were 12 of us in total, a mix of Haven staff and fellow survivors. As the others began setting up a makeshift camp, Sarah pulled me aside. "Dave, we need to look at what's on that flash drive," she whispered urgently. I nodded, feeling the weight of the small device in my pocket. We found a quiet spot away from the others and pulled out the laptop we'd managed to grab during our escape from Haven. As the files loaded, my heart raced. What we found was beyond anything we could have imagined. Project Lazarus wasn't just about finding a cure for the infected. It was an attempt to control them, to create a new breed of human that could survive in a world overrun by the virus. The files detailed horrific experiments, combining infected DNA with human subjects. The goal was to create create beings with the strength and immunity of the infected, but with human intelligence seen at Haven were the result. But the project had clearly spiraled out of control. But it was the last file that made my blood run cold. It was a list of names, locations of other facilities like Haven, and there, among the data, were the words we'd been desperately searching for. Mitchell children located, Facility 7. Sarah gasped, her hand gripping mine tightly. Our kids were alive, and we knew where they were, but they were in the hands of people who had created those monsters back at Haven. Before we could discuss our next move, a shout from the camp caught our attention. One of the Haven scientists was pointing at the sky, his face pale with fear. A black helicopter was approaching, bearing the same markings as the one that had brought us to Haven. We hadn't escaped after all. They'd found us. Everyone back. In the truck, Maria yelled, already running towards the vehicle. We scrambled to pack up, but we were too slow. The helicopter was upon us in moments, armed men rappelling down before it had even fully landed. Surrender immediately, a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. You have stolen property of Project Lazarus. Cooperate, and you will not be harmed. I looked at Sarah, saw the determination in her eyes that matched my own. We couldn't let them take us, couldn't let them get the information we'd discovered, and we couldn't lose our chance to find our children. In the chaos that followed, it was hard to keep track of everything that happened. Gunfire erupted from both sides. I found myself pulling Sarah behind the truck for cover, returning fire with the weapons we'd taken from Haven. Maria was a whirlwind of action, organizing the other survivors into a defensive position, but we were outnumbered and outgunned. It was only a matter of time before we were overwhelmed. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, a deafening roar cut through the battle. From the forest emerged a group of infected drawn by the noise of our fight, but these weren't ordinary infected. They moved with purpose, attacking the Lazarus forces with frightening efficiency. In the confusion, I saw our chance. "Maria!" I shouted over the noise. "We need to go now!" She nodded, understanding immediately. As the infected clashed with the Lazarus forces, we made a run for the truck. I paused only to grab the laptop, ensuring the crucial data wasn't left behind. We sped away, the sounds of battle fading behind us. In the rearview mirror, I saw the intelligent infected turn their attention to the helicopter, somehow knowing it was a threat. The last thing I saw before we turned a corner was the aircraft going down in flames. As we put miles between us and the site of the battle, a heavy silence fell over the truck. We had escaped, but the revelations of the day weighed heavily on all of us. "Where are we going?" someone finally asked. I exchanged a look with Sarah before addressing the group. "We found something in the Haven files," I said. "A list of other facilities and information about our children." A mix of reactions swept through the survivors. Some looked hopeful at the prospect of other safe locations. Others seemed wary, given what we'd just escaped from. "We can't trust any of these places," Maria said firmly. "You saw what they were doing at Haven." "I know," I agreed. "But our kids are in one of these facilities. We have to get them out." The debate that followed was heated. Some argued it was too dangerous, that we should focus on finding a safe place to hole up. Others supported the rescue mission. In the end, it was Sarah who silenced everyone. "Listen," she said, her voice quiet but intense. "What we saw at Haven, what they were doing, it's changing everything. Those intelligent infected, they're organized. They're planning. If we don't do something, there might not be anywhere left to hide soon." Her words hung in the air, the truth of them undeniable. We had all seen how quickly the world had fallen to the original infected. How much worse could it get with these new, evolved versions? "Okay," Maria said after a long moment. "So what's the plan?" I pulled out the map we'd downloaded from the flash drive. "Facility 7 is here," I said, pointing to a location about 300 miles north. "It's our best lead, not just for our kids, but for finding out more about what's really going on." As we planned our journey, I couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. We were heading into the unknown, possibly walking right into the heart of the organization that had created this nightmare. But we had no choice. Our children were there, and beyond that, answers that could be crucial to humanity's survival. The next few days were a blur of constant movement. We avoided main roads, sticking to backcountry routes to evade both infected and potential Lazarus patrols. Our supplies ran low, forcing us to scavenge in abandoned towns along the way. Each stop was a risk, a chance of encountering. On the third day of our journey, we had our closest call yet. We'd stopped in a small town to search for fuel, our truck running on fumes. As we approached a gas station, we spotted movement inside. Survivors, we thought at first, but as they emerged, we realized our mistake. It was a group of the intelligent infected, clearly scavenging just as we were. They spotted us immediately, their eyes gleaming with that unnerving awareness. We barely made it back to the truck in time, the infected in close pursuit. As we sped away, I couldn't help but notice how organized they seemed. They weren't just chasing us blindly. They were coordinating, trying to cut us off. It was a chilling reminder of what we were up against. "They're everywhere," Sarah said quietly, as we finally lost our pursuers. "How are we going to do this?" I wished I had a reassuring answer for her, but the truth was I didn't know. We were outmatched, outnumbered, and heading towards a facility that was likely even more secure than Haven had been. As we neared Facility 7, we began to see signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks on abandoned roads, distant lights in the night sky. We were getting close, but so was our window of opportunity. We made camp one last time, about 10 miles from our target. As the others prepared for the potential fight ahead, Sarah and I took a moment alone. "Dave," she said, her voice barely a whisper, what if our kids aren't there? Or what if they are?" But she couldn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she was thinking. What if we were too late? What if they had already been subjected to the same experiments we'd seen evidence of at Haven? I pulled her close, trying to find words of comfort even as my own doubts threatened to overwhelm me. "We'll face whatever we find," I said, "together, and we'll deal with it. We've come too far to give up now." As we held each other, I gazed out at the night sky. Somewhere out there were our children and the answers to what had really happened to our world. Tomorrow, one way or another, we'd find the truth. The facility loomed before us in the pre-dawn light, a sprawling complex surrounded by high walls and watchtowers. It looked more like a fortress than a research center. As we observed from our hidden position in the nearby woods, I felt a mix of determination and fear. Our children were in there somewhere, so close yet still out of reach. We had spent the night formulating a plan. It was risky, borderline suicidal, but it was all we had. Maria and a few others would create a distraction at the main gate, while Sarah and I, along with two of the Haven scientists who had joined us, would attempt to infiltrate through a less guarded section of the wall. As we waited for Maria's signal, I checked my weapon one last time. The gear we'd taken from Haven felt alien in my hands, a reminder of how much our world had changed. I caught Sarah's eye, saw the same mix of fear and resolve that I felt. A series of explosions rocked the pre-dawn silence. Maria's distraction had begun. It was time. We moved quickly towards the section of wall we'd identified, using the chaos at the main gate as cover. One of the Haven scientists, Dr. Chen, pulled out a device she'd cobbled together from scavenged parts. "This should scramble their security systems for a few minutes," she whispered, "but we'll have to be fast." As soon as the device activated, we began our climb. The wall was high, but we'd come prepared with climbing gear. My muscles screamed with the effort, the wound in my shoulder threatening to reopen. But the thought of our children on the other side drove me on. We made it over the top, just as alarms began to blare across the facility. Guards were rushing towards the main gate, leaving our section momentarily unguarded. We dropped to the ground inside the perimeter and quickly took cover behind some storage containers. "Now what?" Sarah asked, her breath coming in short gasps. I pulled out the rough map we'd drawn based on the Haven files. "The main research area should be in that building," I said, pointing to a large structure in the center of the compound. "If the kids are here, that's where they'll be." We began to make our way across the compound, using the confusion of the attack to our advantage. But as we neared the central building, a new sound cut through the chaos. It was a roar I'd heard before back at Haven. The intelligent infected were here too. "They must have followed us," Dr. Chen said, her face pale with fear. Before we could respond, a group of the creatures rounded a corner ahead of us. They spotted us immediately, their unnaturally bright eyes focusing on us with predatory intensity. "Run!" I shouted, all attempts at stealth abandoned. We sprinted towards the main building, the infected in close pursuit. I could hear gunfire erupting across the compound as the facility's defenses engaged both our distraction team. We burst through the doors of the central building, quickly barricading them behind us. But we knew it wouldn't hold for long. We had to move fast. The interior of the building was a maze of corridors and laboratories. We split up, each taking a different direction to cover more ground. 10 minutes, I said. Then we meet back here with or without the kids. Sarah squeezed my hand once before disappearing down a hallway. I watched her go, fighting the urge to follow. We had a better chance of finding the children if we separated, but the thought of losing her in this place was almost unbearable. I pushed the fear aside and began my search. Room after room revealed nothing but empty labs and offices. The signs of hasty evacuation were everywhere, computer screens still glowing, papers scattered across desks. As I turned a corner, I came face to face with a guard. We both froze for a split second before reacting. I was faster, my fist connecting with his jaw before he could raise his weapon. He went down hard and I quickly disarmed him, using his own zip ties to secure him. "Where are the children?" I demanded. "The ones brought here from other facilities?" The guard's eyes widened in fear, not of me, but of something else. "Sub-level 3, he gasped. "But you don't want to go there. They're not children anymore." A chill ran down my spine at his words. What had they done to our kids? I left the guard secured and made for the nearest stairwell, descending rapidly to sub-level 3. The atmosphere changed as soon as I entered the sub-level. The sterile whites and grays of the upper floors gave way to dimly lit corridors lined with heavy secured doors. It felt more like a prison than a research facility. I moved cautiously, checking each room through small observation windows. Most were empty, but some contained scenes that would haunt me for years to come. People, or what used to be people, in various stages of transformation. Some looked almost normal, others were twisted parodies of humanity, and And then, in a room near the end of the corridor, I saw them. Two small figures huddled together on a bed. My heart leapt into my throat. Could it really be them? I fumbled with the key card I'd taken from the guard, my hand shaking as I swiped it through the reader. The door clicked open and I stepped inside. They looked up as I entered, their eyes wide with fear. For a moment I didn't recognize them. They were pale, too thin, with a strange gleam in their eyes that reminded me uncomfortably of the infected. But as I looked closer, I saw the features I knew so well. My children. "Dad?" my daughter whispered, her voice small and uncertain. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed with emotion. "It's me," I choked out. "I'm here. I found you." They didn't move, still watching me warily. What had been done to them in this place? What horrors had they endured? Before I could say more, an explosion rocked the building. The infected had breached the defenses. We were out of time. I stood, holding out my hands to my children. "We have to go," I said urgently. "Mom's waiting for us. We're going to get you out of here." They hesitated for a moment longer, then slowly stood and approached me. As they drew closer, I noticed subtle changes in them. Their movements were too fluid, their gaze too intense. The guard's words echoed in my mind. They're not children anymore, but they were my children, no matter what had been done to them, and I would die before I left them in this place. As I led them out of the room, alarms blaring and the sounds of battle echoing from above, I knew our ordeal was far from over. We had found our children, but at what cost? And what challenges would we face in the world outside? A world overrun by the infected and forever changed by the machinations of Project Lazarus? With my children's hands in mine, I made for the rendezvous point. Whatever came next, we would face it as a family. In this new, terrifying world, it was all we had left. We raced through the corridors of Facility 7, alarms blaring all around us. My children, Emma and Ethan, kept pace with an eerie grace that sent chills down my spine. Their movements were too precise, too controlled for kids their age. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on getting us to safety. As we neared the rendezvous point, I heard gunfire and shouts. Rounding a corner, we came face to face with a scene of chaos. Sarah was there, along with Dr. Chen and a few guards who seemed to have switched sides. They were engaged in a firefight with both facility security and a group of intelligent infected. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw us, relief and shock warring on her face. "Dave, the kids!" I pushed Emma and Ethan towards her. "Take them, I'll cover you." Grabbing a fallen guard's weapon, I joined the fray. The battle was intense, with the infected showing tactical awareness that made them even more terrifying. They seemed to prioritize targets with unsettling intelligence. We fought our way to an emergency exit, the children between us. As we burst out into the open air, I saw that the entire facility was in chaos. Infected swarmed the grounds, battling both our people and facility security. In the distance, I could see Maria and the others from our distraction team fighting their way towards us. "The truck," Dr. Chen shouted, pointing to where we'd left our vehicle hidden just outside the perimeter wall. We made a run for it, covering each other as we went. The infected seemed to focus on us with frightening intensity, as if they knew we were escaping with something important. Just as we reached the truck, a massive infected, larger than any I'd seen before, charged at us from the side. It moved with incredible speed, batting aside anyone in its path. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the creature bearing down on Sarah and the kids. Without thinking, I threw myself into its path. The impact was like hitting a brick wall. I felt ribs crack as I was thrown to the ground. Through a haze of pain, I saw Emma and Ethan react with inhuman speed. They moved in perfect synchronization, attacking the giant infected with a ferocity that belied their small size. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light as they fought. The sight filled me with a mixture of awe and horror. What had been done to our children? What had they become? Before I could dwell on it, Sarah was there, pulling me to my feet. "We have to go, now." We piled into the truck, Maria taking the wheel. As we sped away from Facility 7, I looked back to see the giant infected watching us leave. Its gaze seemed almost thoughtful. The first few hours of our escape were tense. We drove in silence, everyone processing what had happened. Emma and Ethan sat quietly, their eyes darting around, with unnervingly alert movements. Finally, when we were sure we weren't being pursued, Maria pulled over in a secluded area. It was time to address the elephant in the room. "What happened to them?" Sarah asked Dr. Chen, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen looked uncomfortable. "From what I can gather from the files we accessed, they were part of Project Lazarus's next phase. They were exposed to a modified version of the infection, one designed to enhance human capabilities without losing cognitive function. Are they safe?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I don't know," Dr. Chen admitted. "They're stable for now, but we don't know the long-term effects. They're not fully human anymore, but they're not like the other infected either. They're something new." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air. Our children were alive, but changed in ways we couldn't fully understand. As if sensing they were the topic of discussion, Emma and Ethan turned to look at us. Their gaze was unsettling. too knowing for children their age. "We're okay, Dad," Emma said, her voice oddly mature. "We're still us, just more." Ethan nodded, in agreement. "We can help now. We're stronger, faster. We can fight them." Their words should have been reassuring, but they sent a chill down my spine. These were not the carefree children we had lost. They had been turned into weapons. Before we could discuss further, Maria, who had been keeping watch, suddenly tensed. "We've got company," she said urgently. In the distance, we could see a dust cloud approaching. As it got closer, we could make out a convoy of vehicles. They bore the markings of Project Lazarus. "They're tracking us somehow," Dr. Chen said, her face pale. "We need to move." We quickly piled back into the truck, but as Maria tried to start the engine, it sputtered and died. "No, no, no," she muttered, trying again. "We're out of gas." Panic set in as the convoy drew nearer. We were sitting ducks out here in the open. I looked at Sarah, saw the same fear and determination in her eyes that I felt. We had just gotten our kids back. We weren't going to lose them again. "Everyone out," I ordered. "We'll make a stand here. Use the truck for cover." As we took up defensive positions, Emma and Ethan moved with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. They seemed to anticipate our strategy, positioning themselves at key points without being told. The convoy screeched to a halt 100 yards away. Armed men poured out of the vehicles, led by a figure I recognized from the Haven files, Dr. Hoffman, one of the lead scientists of Project Lazarus. "Surrender the children," his voice boomed through a megaphone. "They are crucial to our work, to the survival of humanity." I felt a surge of anger. "They're not your lab rats," I shouted back. "They're our kids." Dr. Hoffman's voice took on a pleading tone. "You don't understand. What we've done, it's the next step in human evolution. Those children are the key to our survival against the infected. Please, let us complete our work." For a moment, doubt crept in. What if Emma and Ethan really were humanity's best hope? But then I looked at their faces, saw the fear hidden behind their unnaturally composed expressions, and my resolve hardened. "No," I said firmly. "We're leaving, and we're taking our children with us." Dr. Hoffman's expression darkened. "Then you leave me no choice." He raised his hand, signaling his men to attack. What followed was a battle unlike anything I'd experienced before. Emma and Ethan moved with incredible speed and strength, taking down armed men with ease. Sarah, Maria, and I fought with everything we had, knowing our lives and our children's freedom hung in the balance. But we were outnumbered and outgunned. Gradually, we were pushed back, surrounded on all sides. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, a familiar roar split the air. From the surrounding wilderness emerged a horde of infected, led by several of the intelligent variants we'd seen at Haven. They fell upon Hoffman's forces with terrifying ferocity. In the chaos that followed, I saw our chance. "Run!" I shouted to our group. "Head for the trees." As we fled, I glanced back to see Dr. Hoffman being overwhelmed by the infected. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. We ran until our lungs burned, the sounds of battle fading behind us. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, the full weight of what had happened hit me. We had our kids back, but they were changed. Perhaps irrevocably, we were being hunted by both Project Lazarus and the infected, and we had no idea where to go or what to do next. As night fell, we made camp in a small clearing, everyone too exhausted to go any further. As the others settled into rest, I took first watch, my mind racing with the events of the day. Emma approached me, her movements silent in a way that no child should be. "Dad," she said softly, "are you afraid of us?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since we'd rescued them. Behind the unnatural glow in her eyes, I could still see my little girl, scared, confused, but still there. "No, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid for you, for all of us." She nestled into my embrace, and for a moment, she felt like the child she used to be. "We'll protect you," she whispered. "Ethan and I, we're strong now. We can fight them." Her words sent a mixture of pride and sorrow through me. No child should have to bear such a burden, but this was the world we lived in now, and we would have to adapt to survive. As Emma drifted off to sleep in my arms, I gazed out into the darkness. Somewhere out there, the infected were evolving, becoming smarter, more organized. Project Lazarus was still out there too, likely regrouping for another attempt to reclaim our children. We were caught between two terrifying forces, with no safe haven in sight. But as I held my daughter, feeling her steady breathing against my chest, I knew one thing for certain. We would face whatever came next as a family, changed, battered, but together. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers we couldn't even imagine. But we had come too far, survived too much to give up now. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges we would face, we would meet them head on. As the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, I gently woke the others. It was time to move again, to find a new path in this changed world. With our enhanced children by our side, we were no longer just survivors. We were something new, something that might just have a chance against the horrors that awaited us. I looked at Sarah, saw the mixture of determination and fear in her eyes that matched my own. We nodded to each other, a silent understanding passing between us. Whatever came next, we would face it together, as a family, as survivors, as the last hope for a world teetering on the brink of extinction. We had been on the move for weeks, constantly looking over our shoulders for signs of pursuit from either Project Lazarus or the intelligent infected. Our group had dwindled to just the core family unit: Sarah, Emma, Ethan, and myself, plus Maria and Dr. Chen. The others had either fallen along the way or chosen to seek their own paths. Our journey took us through abandoned towns and desolate countryside. Everywhere we went, we saw signs of the world that had been lost. Empty houses with family photos still on the walls, schools with lessons forever interrupted on their chalkboards, playgrounds silent and overgrown. It was a constant reminder of what we were fighting for and what we stood to lose if we failed. Emma and Ethan continued to surprise and unsettle us with their new abilities. They never seemed to tire, could spot danger from impossibly far away, and displayed strength and agility that no child should possess. But in quiet moments, I could still see flashes of the shy smile when he solved a puzzle, Emma's determination when she set her mind to a task. We were heading north, towards the Canadian border. Dr. Chen believed that the colder climate might slow down the infected, giving us a better chance of finding a safe haven. But as we traveled, we began to notice disturbing patterns in the behavior of the infected we encountered. They were organizing, setting up ambushes, using tactics that spoke of a higher intelligence guiding them. More than once, we narrowly escaped traps that seemed designed specifically for us. It was as if they were learning, evolving with each encounter. One evening, as we made camp in an abandoned farmhouse, Maria voiced what we had all been thinking. "They're hunting us," she said, her voice low. "Not just random attacks, they're specifically tracking us." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "It's the children," she said. "They must be giving off some kind of signal, something the infected can sense." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air. Our children, our hope for the future, were also beacons drawing our enemies to us. That night, as Sarah and I took watch together, we had the conversation we'd been avoiding for weeks. "What are we going to do?" Sarah whispered, her eyes never leaving the darkened landscape around us. "We can't keep running forever," I sighed, feeling the weight of our situation pressing down on me. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we can't give up. There has to be a way to use what's been done to Emma and Ethan to find a cure or a way to fight back." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "And if there isn't?" she finally asked. "If this is just the new reality we have to live with?" I didn't have an answer for her. The truth was, I was terrified of what the future might hold, but we had no choice but to keep moving forward, to keep fighting for a world where our children could have some semblance of a normal life. As dawn broke, we packed up camp and hit the road again. We had managed to get our hands on a sturdy SUV a few days back, which made travel easier but also made us more conspicuous. As we drove through the eerily empty countryside, Emma suddenly sat up straight in the back seat. "Stop the car," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "There's something ahead." I slammed on the brakes, trusting her enhanced senses without question. We had learned the hard way that ignoring Emma and Ethan's warnings could be fatal. "What is it, sweetie?" Sarah asked, scanning the road ahead. Emma's eyes were unfocused, as if she was seeing something beyond the physical world. "A group," she said. "Not infected, not Lazarus. They're like us." Before we could question her further, a figure stepped out onto the road ahead. It was a man, probably in his late 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "We mean you no harm," he called out. "We've been waiting for you." I exchanged a wary glance with Sarah. How could they have been waiting for us? We hadn't told anyone where we were going. Slowly, cautiously, we exited the vehicle. Maria and Dr. Chen flanked us, weapons at the ready, while Emma and Ethan stood. Slightly ahead, their postures tense and ready for action. The man approached, his movements careful and non-threatening. As he got closer, I noticed something odd about his eyes. They had the same unnatural gleam as Emma and Ethan's. "My name is Michael," he said, "and like your children, I'm a survivor of Project Lazarus." His words sent a jolt through our group. Another survivor, an adult who had been through the same process as our children? "How did you find us?" I asked, still not ready to lower my guard. Michael tapped his temple. "We can sense each other," he explained. "Your children have been broadcasting their presence since you left the facility. It's how we found you, and it's how the infected have been tracking you." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All this time, we had been unknowingly announcing our presence to every enhanced being in the area, infected or otherwise. "We?" Sarah asked, picking up on the plural. As if on cue, more figures emerged from the surrounding woods. Men, women, even a few children, all with the same gleam in their eyes as Emma and Ethan. There were maybe 24 of them in total. "We're a community," Michael explained. "Survivors of various Lazarus facilities who found each other. We've established a safe haven, a place where we can live and work on finding a solution to this nightmare." It sounded too good to be true. After everything we'd been through, the idea of a safe place, of not having to run anymore, was almost overwhelming. "Why should we trust you?" Maria asked, voicing the suspicion we all felt. Michael's expression turned grim. "Because if we don't work together, humanity doesn't stand a chance. The infected infected are evolving faster than we anticipated. They're organizing, planning, and paused, his gaze sweeping over our group. Project Lazarus isn't defeated. They're regrouping, continuing their experiments. And there are other groups out there, other factions with their own agendas. The world is changing faster than anyone could have predicted. We need to be ready. I looked at Sarah, saw the mix of hope and fear in her eyes that I knew was mirrored in my own. Then I glanced at Emma and Ethan. For the first time since we'd rescued them, they looked excited, hopeful, like they finally saw a place where they might belong. What exactly are you proposing? I asked Michael. Come with us, he said simply. See our community for yourself. If you choose to stay, we'll welcome you. If not, you're free to leave. But I think you'll find that together, we have a real chance at not just surviving, but at reclaiming our world. It was a pivotal moment. Everything in me wanted to reject the offer, to keep running, to protect my family on my own. But I knew that wasn't sustainable. We needed allies, resources, a safe place to regroup and plan. I looked at each member of our group in turn. Sarah nodded slightly, trusting me to make the right call. Maria and Dr. Chen both looked cautiously optimistic, and Emma and Ethan, they were practically vibrating with anticipation. All right, I said finally, we'll come see this community of yours, but we're not making any commitments yet. Michael smiled, relief evident on his face. That's all we ask. Follow us, and we'll show you what we've built. As we prepared to follow Michael and his group, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into a new chapter of our journey. Whether it would lead to salvation or further into danger, only time would tell. We traveled for several hours, moving deeper into the wilderness. Michael's group led us off-road, through dense forest and across rushing streams. Just as I was beginning to wonder if we were being led into a trap, we crested a hill and saw it. Nestled in a valley, protected by steep cliffs on three sides, was a community unlike anything I'd seen since the outbreak began. It looked like a small town with houses, gardens, and what appeared to be communal buildings. But what really caught my attention were the defenses. High walls surrounded the entire community, with watchtowers at regular intervals. I could see people moving about, some on patrol, others going about daily tasks. Welcome to Haven, Michael said, a note of pride in his voice. Our home and hopefully yours too. As we approached the gates, I saw more evidence of the community's preparedness. There were gardens and greenhouses, solar panels on many of the roofs, and what looked like a small hydroelectric system utilizing the nearby river. The gates opened as we neared, and we were greeted by a diverse group of people. All of them had the telltale gleam in their eyes that marked them as Lazarus survivors. Come, Michael said. Let's get you settled in and then we can talk more. The next few hours were a whirlwind of introductions and explanations. We were shown to a house that would be ours if we chose to stay, given a tour of the community, and introduced to key members of Haven's leadership. It was overwhelming but also inspiring. These people had taken the curse that had been forced upon them and turned it into something positive. They were using their enhanced abilities to protect and provide for each other, to fight back against the infected, and to work towards a cure. As the day wore on, we gathered in what they called the community center for a more in-depth briefing. Michael and several others explained the situation as they understood it. The infected are evolving, a woman named Clara, who had been a virologist before the outbreak, explained. They're developing a hive mind of sorts. The more intelligent ones are able to control the others, coordinating their actions over vast distances. And it's not just the infected we have to worry about. Another man, introduced as former military intelligence officer Jack, added, Project Lazarus is still out there, still experimenting, and there are other groups too. Some are trying to find a cure, others are looking to take advantage of the chaos for their own gain. The information was sobering. The world outside Haven's walls was even more dangerous than we had realized. So what's your plan? I asked. How do you intend to fight back? Michael leaned forward, his expression intense. We believe that the key lies in understanding and controlling the changes the Lazarus Project made to us. If we can fully harness these abilities, we might be able to communicate with the infected, maybe even control them. The idea was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Control the infected? It seemed impossible, but then again, a few months. Ego, I would have said the same about the existence of zombies. And where do we fit into all this? Sarah asked her. Michael's gaze swept over our group, lingering on Emma and Ethan. Your children are unique, he said. They're the only ones we've encountered who were changed so young. They might be the key to understanding how the process works, how to control it. And you, he looked at me and Sarah. As their parents, your DNA could be crucial in our research. I felt a surge of protectiveness. We're not going to let you experiment on our kids, I said firmly. Michael held up his hands placatingly. No, nothing like that. We're talking about voluntary participation in carefully controlled studies. No one here will be forced to do anything against their will. As the meeting continued, I found myself torn. Everything they were saying made sense. Haven seemed like the best chance we had at not just surviving, but at fighting back, at reclaiming our world. But years of running, of fighting, had left me wary of anything that seemed too good to be true. As night fell, our group gathered in our new house to discuss our options. The kids were clearly in favor of staying. They had already started forming connections with the other inhabitants enhanced children in the community. It feels right, Dad, Emma said, her eyes bright with excitement, like we're meant to be here. Sarah was cautiously optimistic. It's more than we could have hoped for, she admitted. A safe place, resources, people who understand what the kids are going through. Maria and Dr. Chen were more reserved, but even they saw the potential benefits of staying. In the end, it came down to me. Everyone was looking to me for the final decision. I thought about everything we'd been through, all the dangers we'd faced. I thought about the evolving threat of the infected, the looming shadow of Project Lazarus, and I thought about the hope I'd seen in my children's eyes when we arrived here. We'll stay, I said finally. For now, we'll give it a chance, but we stay alert, and if anything feels off, we leave. Agreed? Everyone nodded, a mix of relief and excitement on their faces. As we settled in for our first night in Haven, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the cusp of something monumental. Whether it would lead to humanity's salvation or to an even greater disaster, only time would tell. But for now, for the first time in months, we were safe. We had a roof over our heads, food in our bellies, and a community around us. It wasn't the world we had known before the outbreak, but it was a start, a new beginning. As I drifted off, to sleep my family safe around me, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future, hope for our children, hope for humanity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, and maybe, just maybe, we would find a way to reclaim our world from the nightmare it had become.